Some hotel doors hide more than weary travelers. They hold secrets that breathe in the dark, waiting for someone foolish enough to listen. Tonight, I'll take you inside those rooms where the "Do Not Disturb" sign was never meant for the staff, but for the living. The air was heavy the moment I stepped through the glass door, as if the motel had been holding its breath for too long. The lobby smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke down to the filter, the kind of stale air that clings to your lungs even after you leave. A buzzing light flickered overhead, casting the front desk in a sickly yellow glow. Behind it, the receptionist sat like a mannequin, skin gray and stretched tight, eyes locked on me without so much as a blink. His lips curled into something that might have been a smile, though it looked more like a crack splitting the surface of a mask. I placed my credit card on the counter. His hand hovered over it, bony fingers trembling, not from weakness, but from restraint, as though he had to remind himself how human hands are supposed to move. He slid the key toward me, an actual brass key on a chipped plastic fob, the number painted on in faded white. No paperwork, no receipt, just that wordless stare. The room was at the far end of the hall, down a stretch of stained carpet that smelled of damp rot. Each step made the floorboards groan as if they resented my weight. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, exposing dark stains that might once have been water damage, but looked more like the outlines of hands pressed against the plaster. A single flickering bulb hummed above me, and for an instant, I thought I heard whispers stitched into its buzz, like voices too soft to rise above static. When I turned the key in the lock, the door opened with a sigh, like it had been holding something back. The room was cleaner than I expected. Too clean. The bedspread was perfectly smooth, tucked tight enough to mummify. The curtains hung straight, blocking out a parking lot that had been empty when I arrived. But the air inside was colder than the hallway, heavy with a coppery tang that turned my stomach. I dropped my bag and sat on the edge of the mattress, but the springs didn't groan. It was as if the bed had no give at all, like it wasn't made for sleeping. On the nightstand, there was a guest book with only one page filled. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, but the message was clear. Once you check in, you never leave. My fingers froze on the paper. It wasn't dated, but the ink was fresh enough to smear beneath my thumb. I glanced toward the mirror above the dresser. For a moment, my reflection didn't move with me. It stood there, staring, eyes a shade darker than mine, mouth pulled into that same cracked smile I had seen at the desk. My pulse hammered in my throat, but I couldn't look away. That was the moment I realized the truth. Quiet and suffocating. I had not checked into this room. The room had checked me in. The clock on the nightstand ticked with a sound too loud for its size, each second stretching longer than it should. Midnight came like a breath caught in my throat. That was when I heard it. The soft, deliberate thump of footsteps pacing back and forth directly above me. I froze. My room was the top floor. The ceiling was the roof. There was nothing above but night air and shingles. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the leftover hum of road noise lodged in my ears. But the steps grew heavier, purposeful, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other in steady rhythm. The sound of a body shifting weight, of heels dragging, of someone restless, searching. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop. Instead, it paused right above where I lay, so heavy I could almost see the dust trembling loose from the plaster. The silence that followed was worse. The air grew colder, pressing against my skin as if the ceiling itself was leaning down to listen. I whispered to myself that it had to be pipes or old beams settling. But then it started again. Not pipes, not wood. Footsteps. A slow, deliberate crossing from wall to wall. Sometimes near the door, sometimes over my head, sometimes in a corner where no one should stand. I got up, pulled on my shoes, and stepped into the hallway. It was empty, stretching into shadow. The only light, that flickering bulb buzzing as though alive. I tilted my head upward. No attic access, no crawl space, just stained ceiling tiles and cracked plaster. Still, the footsteps continued, muffled but undeniable. A second heartbeat above the corridor. Back inside the room, I pressed my ear to the ceiling. The sound was clearer now. So close I swore I could hear the scrape of toes against grit. Then, a drag, like something was being pulled, heavy, reluctant. My chest tightened. I tried the television, desperate for noise, but the screen only hissed static no matter how many times I hit the buttons. The phone rang once, sharp, sudden, but when I picked it up, there was nothing, only the echo of the same footsteps filtering through the receiver. I did not sleep. I lay stiff on the bed, covers pulled to my chin, watching the mirror across from me. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, it rippled faintly, like water. And each time, the footsteps quickened above, as though whoever was pacing had leaned closer, aware that I was watching, aware that I was trying to convince myself I was still alone. When the clock struck 3, the steps stopped. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over. But then came the sound I had dreaded most, the slow creak of weight, not above, but inside my room. The floorboards whispered under pressure, and I knew whatever had been walking on the roof had found its way down. The air in the room thickened, damp and heavy, though I hadn't turned on the tap. My breath clouded in front of me as though winter had seeped through the walls. And when I looked at the mirror above the dresser, a thin layer of fog bloomed across its surface. My skin prickled. There was no shower, no steam, nothing to explain the condensation. The mirror was breathing on its own. At first, it was just haze, a soft blur. Then, slowly, letters began to carve their way through the mist, drawn from the inside out. My pulse hammered as I watched the shapes form in jagged strokes, backward but unmistakable. Do not leave. My throat tightened. It looked like someone's fingertip had dragged through the fog, strokes sharp, urgent, almost desperate. I staggered backward until my knees hit the bed. The room felt smaller now, pressing in, the message glaring at me from that warped glass. I whispered into the silence, asking who was there, though I already knew the answer. No one I wanted to meet. The fog didn't fade. The words lingered as though etched deep, dripping moisture down the glass in dark streaks. I tried wiping them away with my sleeve, but the letters bled back instantly, sharper this time, carved deeper, like the mirror wanted to cut the warning into me. I turned toward the door. My instinct screamed to run, but the knob twitched before I could touch it, rattling like something was testing it from the other side. The sound grew violent, metal clanging in its frame, until suddenly it went still. That silence was worse than the noise. I spun back to the mirror. For a moment, the reflection wasn't mine. A figure stood behind me, tall and thin, its head tilted unnaturally far to one side, hair hanging in a wet curtain over a face that didn't belong in this world. My chest seized. When I whipped around, the room was empty, the curtains swaying though no window had been opened. My heart clawed at my ribs, each beat sharp with panic. I forced myself to stare back into the mirror. My reflection had returned, pale and shaking. But the message remained. Do not leave. And then, as I watched, a second line scratched itself beneath it, slow and deliberate. You are already mine. I stumbled into the corner, gripping the nightstand as though wood could save me. The walls groaned around me, the ceiling seemed to sag, and for the first time I understood. The room wasn't warning me to stay for my safety. It was commanding me. It had closed its doors, locked me into its veins. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was the next possession. The knob began to twitch before I even heard the first whisper. A soft metallic tremor, subtle at first, like the pulse of some hidden vein running through the doorframe. Then came the scrape of skin against wood, a slow, dragging sound that set my teeth on edge. My heart tripped over itself. I stayed frozen on the bed, the mirror behind me still wet with its message, while the door rattled as though someone on the other side was trying to push their way in without ever knocking. The air went dense, pressing against my eardrums. My name slipped through the gap beneath the door, a sound like paper tearing underwater. It wasn't just a whisper. It was my own voice, low and frayed, as if it had been left out in the cold too long. Each time it spoke, the door trembled harder, the knob twisting, then pausing, then twisting again. I crept to the edge of the room, toes on the sticky carpet, every step deliberate. My fingers hovered over the lock but didn't touch it. The whisper came again, drawn out now, syllables stretched thin, almost loving. My name, over and over, until it didn't even sound like a name anymore, but a chant. The rattling turned violent. The door bowed inward, the hinges whining, and I thought of ribs under pressure. Something pressed its weight against the wood, testing it, patient but sure of its strength. I backed away until my shoulders hit the cold dresser. The mirror quivered on its hooks, fog rolling off the glass in ghostly tendrils that curled across the ceiling. In it, I could see the door moving, but not the thing behind it. Just the shape of hands, pale and blurred, flattening against the wood. My name hissed again, right against my ear now, though the door hadn't opened. The sound crawled along my skin, warm and wet, like breath from something that had been buried too long. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it found a way inside anyway. A voice that vibrated through my bones rather than my hearing. The lock snapped with a metallic click. The knob turned of its own accord, slow and sure. For one wild heartbeat, I thought of bolting for the window. But when I glanced at it, the curtains had fused to the frame, sealing me in. The door opened a fraction of an inch, enough to let a slice of hallway darkness spill into the room. My name came again, no longer whispered but spoken with a cracked tenderness that promised I'd be welcomed. Pulled out of myself, remade, the gap widened, and I saw nothing but black beyond it, black that seemed to move. I knew then the room hadn't simply trapped me. It had called its hands to claim me. The night bled into something endless, hours stretched thin like skin over bone. I remember the door easing shut again, though I never saw who or what had pressed against it. I remember the whispers tapering into silence, but the silence was worse, thick and deliberate, as if the room were listening for me to breathe. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under, though it felt less like sleep and more like being pinned, eyes shut by a hand I could not see. When light finally seeped through the curtains, it was weak, gray, the color of ashes. Dawn should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like a verdict. The air was no warmer. The mirror was bare now, no words, only my reflection staring back, eyes hollowed out by what I had endured. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it had been a dream, a fever spun from nerves and shadows. Then I saw the desk. The guest book lay open, not where I had left it. The ink glistened fresh, as if written moments ago. At the bottom of the page, in jagged strokes I recognized too well, was my own. Name signed clean across the bill. My stomach dropped. I had never picked up a pen. I touched the page, hoping it would smudge, prove itself false. But the ink held fast. The loops and angles were perfect, identical to my own hand, but carved with a weight that was not mine. The date beside it was today. The time recorded was not when I checked in, but the exact moment the whispers had pressed through the door. The room hummed around me, wood and plaster vibrating with quiet satisfaction. It had not just held me. It had claimed me, documented me, filed me away like all the others before. The space felt cleaner now, lighter, as though it had purged itself. The bedspread was perfectly smooth again. The curtains hung without crease. The air was still, waiting for the next visitor. I tried the door. This time it opened easily. The hallway beyond was silent, sterile, as if nothing had ever happened. I carried my bag in numb hands, walking on legs that did not feel like my own. Downstairs, the lobby was deserted. The receptionist's chair sat empty, yet the register on the counter bore a fresh page with my name, my signature etched into its ledger. I wanted to scream, to rip the book apart, but my throat locked. The exit loomed just ahead, daylight pouring through the glass doors. Still, I hesitated, because in the edge of my vision, through the reflection in that front desk glass, I saw myself still standing at the counter, never leaving, pen clutched tight in my hand, smiling with a face that wasn't mine. The lobby was always quieter after midnight, but that night, the silence felt too complete, as though the walls were listening for something I could not hear. My first shift alone stretched out in front of me, the old desk lamp buzzing faintly, casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. The manager, a tired man with hollow eyes, had left me with the usual reminders about keys, wake-up calls, and drunks stumbling in from the highway. But before leaving, he paused at the door, his hand tightening on the frame. "Do not take calls from room 14, he said, his voice flat and final. "If he asks for anything, do not go up. Just let it be." I laughed nervously, waiting for him to smirk, to show it was a joke, some initiation for the new hire. But he didn't smile. His face sagged like wet paper, his eyes dark with a weight that made me want to ask him questions. Still, I didn't. His tone was not one you argued with. After he left, the emptiness pressed in. I skimmed through the logbook. Room 14 had been checked in for weeks, maybe months. Always under the same name, written in spidery script that was hard to read. No one had seen the guest come or go. No phone calls, no luggage, no fresh towels. Yet the room was always marked as occupied. Around 1 a.m, the phone at the desk rang. The sound was piercing in the quiet, sharp enough to make me jump. I lifted the receiver, trying to keep my voice steady, and froze when I saw the glowing red numbers on the switchboard. Room 14. The line hissed like static, the faint scrape of breath pressed against the other end. "Is someone there?" I asked. The breathing quickened, shallow and ragged, and then a voice whispered low, as though speaking from just behind me instead of down the line. It was soft, rasping, and unmistakably human. "Come up," it said. The line went dead. My hand shook as I replaced the receiver, heart hammering too fast for reason. The logbook sat open beside me, the name scrawled there, almost pulsing on the page. I couldn't look away from it, though the letters blurred the longer I stared. The air seemed to shift in the lobby then, colder, heavier. I told myself I wouldn't go near that hallway, wouldn't even step off the desk mat. But when the elevator bell chimed, though no one had entered it, I felt my head snap toward the corridor leading to the rooms. The light above the elevator door glowed red, and the needle stopped on 14. I held my breath, waiting for footsteps. None came. Only the faintest trace of a door opening down the hall, followed by the whisper of someone finally stepping out. The morning after my first shift, the manager returned, looking more exhausted than when he had left. He glanced at the desk before saying anything, and I followed his gaze. There it was, room 14's key, resting neatly in its slot as though it had never left. My chest tightened. I hadn't placed it there. I hadn't even touched it. I asked, almost against my will, if the guest had checked out during the night. The manager didn't look at me when he answered. "He never checks out," he muttered, turning the logbook toward himself as if shielding it from my eyes. Then, softer, as though it wasn't meant for me at all, he said, "He always comes back." The words gnawed at me through the day. I asked the cleaning staff about room 14, but they avoided my questions, muttering excuses about schedules and assignments. When pressed, one woman finally whispered, "We do not clean that room." Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a trembling line. She wouldn't look at me. That night, I stared at the key slot, waiting. Midnight came, and the phone rang again. Room 14. I let it ring, counting each shrill note like the beat of a clock. It stopped suddenly, and for a moment I thought that was it, that I had escaped the ritual. But when I looked down, the key was gone. I hadn't seen anyone approach the desk. The lobby was empty. I checked the hallways, the elevator, the glass doors at the entrance. Nothing. Yet the key had vanished as though plucked away by invisible fingers. The hours stretched thin. I dozed once or twice at the desk, my chin against my chest, the hum of the light above me drilling into my dreams. When I startled awake near dawn, the lobby was silent again. The key was back in its slot, perfectly aligned, gleaming faintly in the weak glow of morning. I told myself someone could have slipped past me, some shadowy figure moving too quietly for me to notice. But the hotel cameras told another story. I checked them, scrolling through grainy black and white footage, frame by frame. No one had entered. No one had left. And yet the key had been gone for hours, then returned. That morning, I pressed my hand against the brass fob, half expecting it to be warm. It wasn't. It was cold, so cold it burned the tips of my fingers. I pulled away quickly, and in the faint reflection on its polished surface, I thought I saw a face staring back. Not mine. Not anyone I recognized. Just a stranger, smiling as though he had been watching the whole time. By the third night, I could not resist my own curiosity. The mystery of room 14 gnawed at me, a splinter under the skin. I told myself I was only doing my job when I stacked fresh towels on the cart and rolled it down the silent hallway. The carpet muffled my steps, but the air changed the closer I came. The usual scent of bleach and stale smoke gave way to something heavier, thicker, a sweetness gone rancid that clung to the back of my throat. I stopped outside the door. The brass numbers, dulled with age, seemed to pulse in the dim light. I raised my hand to knock, but hesitated. The rules echoed in my mind. Do not answer calls, do not disturb, do not engage. Yet here I was, heart pounding, towel bundle trembling in my grip. The decision was made for me. The door creaked open before I touched it. Just a sliver at first, then wider, as if inviting me in. The stench poured out like a tide, thick with decay, with something once living that had been left too long in darkness. My stomach lurched, bile rising as I stepped back. The hallway behind me felt endless, empty, yet I could not turn away. From the gap of the doorway, the room was nothing but shadow, darker than the unlit corridor, as though light refused to enter. I forced my voice to steady, called out that I was leaving towels. No reply, only a faint dragging sound, somewhere deep inside, like fabric across a floor. I set the towels carefully on the cart, ready to retreat, but the door swung wider. My legs locked, caught between fear and fascination. The stench deepened, filling the air until breathing felt like swallowing rot. And then I saw it. A hand, pale and thin, curling around the edge of the door. The fingers were too long, the nails dark with something I dared not name. They tapped once against the wood, slow, deliberate, like a signal. My name whispered out from the darkness, fragile and rasping, the same voice I had heard on the phone. I staggered backward, but the hand slid back inside, the door easing shut as though nothing had happened. The silence that followed was worse than the stench. I gripped the cart until my knuckles ached, listening, waiting for the latch to click. It never did. The door stayed just slightly, ajar, breathing foul air into the hall. I left the towels stacked neatly beside it and forced myself to walk away, each step heavier than the last. When I finally glanced back, the towels were gone. Only the cart remained, and the door was closed once more. Yet the smell lingered on my clothes, sinking into my skin, as though the room had claimed me with nothing more than a breath. By the fourth night, dread had tangled itself with obsession. I told myself I only wanted proof, something to explain the key that returned on its own, the voice that spoke my name, the towels that vanished without a trace. My hands shook as I slid the spare master key into the lock of room 14. The door resisted at first, as though the wood itself disapproved, but then it gave way with a soft sigh that chilled the back of my neck. The smell hit me instantly, sour and wet, the stench of something spoiled left to fester in dark air. I stepped inside, every nerve screaming to retreat, but the door clicked shut behind me before I could change my mind. My flashlight beam cut across the room, catching details that made my stomach twist. The bed sagged deeply at its center, the mattress sunken as though someone had lain there without rising for years. The sheets were stained with blotches that spread outward like old wounds, the fabric stiff with what I could only pray was rust. I forced myself closer. The air grew thicker with each step, pressing against my chest, heavy with rot. When I reached the bed, my boot struck the frame and something shifted beneath the mattress. A dull, weighted thud. I froze. My light trembled over the surface of the sheets, following the outlines of something underneath, long, rigid shapes pressed up from below, too uneven to be storage, too human to be coincidence. My throat locked. The smell was stronger here, seeping up through the mattress, through the sheets, through the years of silence. I pressed my hand against the fabric despite the nausea rising in me. The surface gave slightly, and the thing beneath shifted again, as if acknowledging the touch. I stumbled back, my flashlight darting to the corners of the room. There was no luggage, no clothing, no sign of life. Just the bed, that sunken hollow, and the weight beneath it that seemed to breathe with the room. I crouched, compelled by some awful magnetism, and lifted the edge of the sheet. The mattress was swollen, seams stretched to splitting. My light caught something dark oozing from a tear near the corner, a sluggish seep of black red that glistened before soaking back into the fabric. The stench was unbearable now, clinging to my throat, to my skin. Before I could force the mattress higher, the floorboards groaned behind me. My light jerked to the door. It was closed, locked from the inside. Yet the sound came again, steady, deliberate. Footsteps. When I turned back to the bed, The sagging shape beneath the mattress had moved closer to the edge, pressing upward with a hunger that promised it was not finished yet. I did not think. I ran. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering against the warped floorboards as I stumbled into the door. It resisted, heavy as if the whole building leaned its weight against me. But panic made me stronger than I thought I could be. The lock snapped, the knob turned, and I burst into the hallway gasping for air that didn't reek of rot. The corridor stretched too long, lights dimming overhead in a sequence that followed my steps. Behind me, the door of room 14 groaned open again, slow and steady, though I hadn't touched it. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The sound of dragging followed, something weighty pulling itself across the carpet, accompanied by a whisper that bent my name into something broken. I reached the lobby, breathless, my chest searing. The desk lamp still buzzed faintly, casting its yellow glow over the counter. Relief flickered through me for one fragile second, until I saw the logbook. It was open, pages curling as though stirred by a hand I could not see. Ink bled across the latest entry, words etching themselves into existence in jagged strokes. My eyes followed helplessly as the letters formed, each one deliberate, a signature crafted from my own handwriting. Room 14, occupied, under my name. I stumbled forward, shaking my head, muttering that it wasn't mine, that I hadn't written it. But the page disagreed. The signature was perfect, too perfect, an imitation so exact it felt stolen from inside me. The ink shimmered wet in the glow, pulsing like blood. And just below, where the line should have ended, the word forever carved itself into the page. The desk phone rang. Its shrill cry cut through the silence, vibrating the counter. I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. The light on the switchboard glowed red. Room 14. The ringing stopped. A faint breath hissed through the receiver, though no one held it. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming to flee the building, to never return. But the glass doors at the entrance reflected something that froze me in place. Not my face, not anymore. The reflection was older, hollow-eyed, pale, standing stiffly at the desk with the logbook open beneath its hand, watching me, smiling faintly. The reflection lifted the pen. The doors would not open. My chest locked tight as the realization settled like ice in my bones. It didn't matter if I left. The room had claimed me the moment I stepped inside. The logbook closed with a sound sharp as a coffin lid, and in the silence that followed, I finally understood. I was no longer the night clerk. I was the guest. Room 14 was mine, and I would never check out. As the button glowed red under my fingertip, a dull circle of light against the tarnished brass panel. The elevator shuddered before I even heard it coming. A low groan like something alive, straining through the building's bones. The doors slid apart sluggishly, as though reluctant to reveal what waited inside. I stepped in anyway, suitcase dragging across the scuffed floor, the stale air wrapping around me like a damp cloth. The overhead bulb flickered twice before holding steady, its light yellow and sickly, illuminating scratches carved deep into the walls. Not vandalism, not random, long vertical gouges as though fingernails had been dragged down again and again in fits of desperation. I told myself they were old, that no hotel this large could be free of strange marks left behind by stranger guests. Still, I kept my hand near the button panel, ready to press the lobby, ready to leave. The doors clanged shut, sealing me into the box of metal and humming wires. I pressed the button marked lobby, and the elevator lurched with such force I gripped the rail instinctively. My reflection swam in the dull sheen of the door opposite me, pale, blurred, twitching slightly as the bulb flickered overhead. The elevator began to descend, slow and uneven. Each floor chimed, the bell distorted, echoing too long, bouncing strangely in the narrow chamber. My stomach knotted. I tried not to look at the scratches, at the grooves cut deep enough to catch the shadows. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies and rusting pipes. Halfway down, the groan deepened into something guttural, the cables whining as if they might snap. I pressed the button again, harder this time, as if insistence would make the machinery behave. The light beneath the lobby flickered, but the car did not stop. Instead, it trembled and kept moving, slower now, deeper. The panel buzzed, every button glowing faintly, though I had touched only one. My reflection rippled across the metal door. It distorted, stretched too tall, eyes darker than they should have been. I blinked, but the face staring back did not blink with me. A sudden jolt nearly threw me off balance. The lights dimmed until only the faint outline of the panel glowed, each number pulsing like a heartbeat. The air felt heavier now, charged, as if the elevator were sinking not through the building, but through something much older. My suitcase tipped and fell with a hollow thud, but the sound did not echo. It vanished, swallowed. The bell chimed again, but this time it didn't announce a floor number. It was lower, distorted, almost a voice. My skin prickled. The doors shivered but didn't open. The elevator groaned louder, and I realized with a chill spreading down my spine that it wasn't carrying me down. It was pulling me in. The car shuddered violently, and I braced against the rail as the numbers above the door blinked in a frantic blur. I had pressed for the lobby, but instead of sliding down toward the ground, the elevator lurched upward with a force that rattled my teeth. The panel chimed floor after floor, but none of it made sense. 11, 12, 13, 14, and then symbols I didn't recognize, jagged lines and broken digits that weren't part of the building at all. The ascent grew faster, the cables whining in protest overhead. My suitcase slid across the floor with each jolt, banging against the wall like a muffled warning. I reached for the emergency stop, slamming the red button until my palm ached. Nothing happened. The car kept rising, the numbers flickering nonsense, the bell chiming in distorted tones that grated against my ears. I told myself it was a malfunction, that old elevators could play tricks, but a chill curled in my gut that logic could not smother. I had been in this hotel long enough to know there were only 10 floors. The needle had already raced past them. We were climbing into a place that shouldn't exist. The air grew thin, harder to swallow, carrying the sharp tang of ozone like before a lightning strike. The bulb overhead pulsed, dimming, then flaring so bright it painted the scratches on the walls in stark detail. They weren't just random gouges. They were words, layered over one another, carved in frantic repetition by countless hands. Some I couldn't read, some only fragments. Help, stop, not real, let me out. My throat dried as I traced them with my eyes. The numbers froze. The bell rang once, hollow, final. I felt the elevator stop, but the doors didn't open. I waited, listening to my heartbeat pound in the silence. Then the numbers flickered again. Slowly this time, stuttering like a dying signal. Floor 40, floor 50, floor 60. There were no such floors. The elevator groaned and kept climbing, each number stranger than the last. Strings of symbols, dashes, empty blocks where digits should have been. I pressed every button on the panel, desperate, but each one lit at once, glowing faintly as though mocking me. My reflection in the door shifted with each flicker, taller, thinner, its mouth moving though mine was not. The ascent slowed. The bulb dimmed to a weak ember, leaving me in half shadow. The display sputtered out entirely, blank and dead, though I felt the car still moving. I pressed myself into the corner, cold sweat dripping down my back. Then, without warning, the doors began to slide open. Not onto a floor, not into a hallway, but into a space where no walls should have been, only blackness stretching wider than the hotel could ever contain. And in the dark, something moved, waiting, as if it had been climbing toward me all along. The doors closed again before I could decide whether to step into that blackness. The car jolted once, then resumed its climb with a slow, deliberate pull, as though the cables were being tugged hand over hand by something that never tired. My chest ached with each breath, and the silence pressed against me until even my heartbeat sounded too loud. That was when I noticed the walls. They were closer. The scratches that had once been scattered now seemed right at my shoulder, gouges I could reach out and touch without moving from where I stood. The floor hummed beneath me, a vibration rising through my soles like the building itself was groaning under the strain of holding me. The dull sheen of the door had changed too. It no longer held just my reflection. The glassy metal rippled, deepened, until it mirrored the back of the car as well. And there, in the reflection, someone stood behind me. I spun so fast my suitcase toppled again, clattering against the corner. The car was empty. Just me, chest heaving, sweat dampening my shirt. But when I turned back to the doors, the reflection was unchanged. A figure lingered behind me, blurred at the edges, but undeniably there, head tilted, face a pale smear. I pressed myself against the panel, fingers darting over buttons. But they all glowed faintly, already chosen, already claimed. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed, while the other stood silently behind it. The bulb overhead flickered, shadows stuttering across the cramped box. Each time the light cut out, the reflection grew sharper, less blurred, until I could make out the curve of a mouth splitting into a grin. The walls groaned. The scratches seemed to deepen, curling into spirals that crawled upward toward the ceiling. The reflection shifted again. This time there were more figures, 2, 3, 4 of them, standing in the cramped space with me in that warped mirror world. My throat locked tight. Their bodies filled the small box. Yet here with me, the air was empty. I could hear them, though, breathing, faint, wet breaths slipping between the grind of the cables. I tried to keep my eyes shut to block it out, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like damp lips brushed the shell of my ear. My name pulsed against me in a voice I had never given to anyone else. When I opened my eyes, the reflections were crowded together, pressing up against the glassy surface of the doors, faces pale, lips cracked, eyes wide and hungry. And behind them all, in the farthest corner of the reflection, I saw myself. Another me, head bowed, hands bloodied, whispering words I couldn't yet hear. The bulb flickered once more, and when the light steadied again, the walls weren't reflections anymore. They were windows, and the strangers on the other side were leaning closer, ready to come through. The car shuddered so violently, I thought the cables had finally snapped. But instead, the motion slowed, groaning into stillness. The panel above the doors flickered once, showing nothing but a blank red square, then hissed out entirely. My pulse raced in my ears as the doors peeled open with a metallic shriek, unveiling something far worse than the black void I had glimpsed before. It was a hallway, long, sterile, washed in the dim glow of ceiling lamps that buzzed like hornets. The carpet was patterned in red and gold swirls, worn to threads, stretching far into the distance. I should have felt relief. Something normal, familiar. But my breath caught as I saw the numbers on the nearest door. 13. I stepped out, my legs trembling, suitcase dragging behind me. The door beside it was marked 13 as well, and the one after that. My stomach turned as I moved down the corridor. Every single door bore the same brass numbers, etched in the same way, gleaming faintly no matter how dim the light. 13, 13, 13. The corridor split ahead into two more halls, both lined with the same endless doors. I spun to look back, to reassure myself I still had the elevator behind me, but the doors had vanished. Only more hallways stretched where the car had been, swallowing the only way out. The air pressed close, heavy with a smell like damp wood and iron. I tried one of the handles. It rattled but didn't give. I tried another, locked. Every door I passed locked tight. Yet behind some of them, I heard the faintest noises. Whispers stitched into laughter, the scrape of furniture dragging, a soft thump like footsteps pacing. Always muffled, never clear, always close enough to remind me I wasn't alone. I walked faster, the hall turning into a maze of sameness. Left, right, forward. Always the same carpet, the same hum of dying lights, the same unending rows of doors marked 13. My suitcase snagged on a seam in the carpet, but when I looked down, it wasn't my suitcase at all. It was older, leather split and straps torn, smeared dark as though it had been abandoned for decades. I left it behind, too afraid to touch. My throat burned with thirst, with fear, and I thought of screaming, of demanding someone open a door. Anyone. But deep down, I knew they would, and I didn't want to see what waited inside. When I finally stopped, and breathless, the corridor stretched on both ways, endless, perfect symmetry. I pressed my forehead against one of the doors, trembling. From inside came a whisper, low and broken, saying what I had feared from the start. Welcome back. And in that moment, I understood. These halls weren't made to be walked. They were made to be wandered forever, until you forgot you had ever come looking for a way out. I don't remember when I started running, only that my footsteps echoed too loudly, chasing me down the corridor of endless doors. My lungs burned, my throat raw, yet the hallway never ended. Each turn bled into another. Each intersection promised relief, but delivered only more doors, each stamped with the brass number 13. The lights above buzzed and flickered, shedding just enough glow to keep me moving, to stop me from collapsing into the dark. I tried not to listen, but the sound seeped through the doors. Groans, whispers, a soft pounding like fists against walls. Sometimes the voices sounded far away. Other times they whispered so close, I thought someone pressed their lips against the wood right beside my ear. I forced myself forward, dragging my body through the maze. Then I saw it. The elevator. Its doors stood wide open at the far end of the corridor, spilling out a golden glow like an invitation. I didn't question how it had returned. I didn't care. I sprinted, every muscle straining, heart slamming in my chest. My suitcase had long been abandoned, but I didn't look back for it. The closer I came, the stranger the light became. It wasn't the sterile yellow I remembered from the elevator bulb. It flickered with something warmer, almost alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. The walls trembled, and the carpet rippled under my feet, trying to trip me, to slow me down. But I reached the threshold and collapsed inside, breath shuddering out of me in broken gasps. The doors slammed shut. Relief washed over me for only a second before I realized the car wasn't moving. The panel was blank. The walls seemed to breathe. My reflection in the metal door swam, distorted, until it wasn't me anymore, but something taller, thinner, with a smile too wide. I pressed against the corner, begging it to move, begging the numbers to return. The bulb overhead flared once, then dimmed to a dull ember. My skin crawled as a voice filled the small chamber. Not outside, not behind the doors. Inside, coming from the walls themselves. It spoke my name in a tone I knew too well. My own voice. "Come back," it whispered. "You can't leave yet." My stomach lurched. I clawed at the panel, pounding buttons, but nothing lit. The voice grew louder, clearer, echoing in perfect imitation of me, until it was no longer whispering but calling, desperate, pleading. The lights died all at once. In that instant of absolute dark, I felt hands brush my shoulders, cold and endless, pulling me deeper into the box. And the last thing I heard, before silence swallowed me whole, was my own voice, calling me back inside, promising I had never left at all. Off the room smelled faintly of bleach, but underneath it lingered something older, the kind of odor that seeps into fabric and never lets go. Cigarette smoke, mildew, sweat. Years of strangers folded into the carpet and curtains. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners, the lamp leaned at an angle it couldn't quite correct, and the bedspread bore cigarette burns hidden poorly beneath the patterned fabric. It was the kind of place you chose when you were too tired to be picky. A stop between cities, a place to collapse and forget the road for a few hours. I set my bag down and dropped onto the mattress, which dipped low enough to remind me of every body that had lain there before mine. The air conditioner wheezed from the wall, rattling like it had a cough, barely pushing out cool air. I told myself it didn't matter. I wouldn't be here long. A few hours of uneasy sleep, and I would be gone by morning, leaving this place behind like every other nameless hotel I'd passed. Beside the bed sat a heavy black telephone, one of those old rotary styles bolted to the table. Its cord was frayed, yellowed with age, the receiver smudged with fingerprints that would never be mine. I brushed it aside with a glance, not planning to use it. The silence of the room pressed in, heavy but familiar, and I lay back, closing my eyes. For a while, it was just the hum of the air conditioner and the distant growl of a truck passing on the highway outside. But when the engine faded, the quiet deepened into something I didn't like. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty at all, but waiting. I rolled over, tugging the thin blanket to my shoulders, and tried to breathe through it. That was when the phone gave a small, sharp click, like someone had lifted the receiver. My eyes snapped open. The air conditioner still rattled, but the sound was unmistakable, too deliberate. I turned my head toward it. The phone sat still on the nightstand, silent now, its dial gleaming faintly in the dim light. I told myself it was old wiring, nothing more. A hotel this cheap couldn't be expected to have anything that worked properly. I turned away, burying my face into the pillow. My breath grew shallow, listening for another click. None came. Just the quiet again, pressing tighter, like the walls had leaned closer to the bed. I shut my eyes, forcing myself toward sleep. But as I drifted, the thought stuck in my mind, gnawing like a loose tooth. Why would a broken phone sound like it was being picked up unless someone was on the other end? The shrill ring split the silence like a knife. I jolted upright, heart pounding, the cheap blanket tangling around my legs. It was 2 a.m. I knew because the red glow of the clock on the nightstand seared the time into my vision. The phone rang again, steady, insistent, as though it had been waiting for me to wake. For a moment, I sat frozen, staring at the black hunk of plastic. It shouldn't have worked. It had no business working at all. But the bell kept screaming until I couldn't bear it. My hand shook as I lifted the receiver. The ringing stopped. At first, there was only static, a hiss that crawled through the line like a storm far away. I almost hung up, almost let it drop back into its cradle. Then a voice seeped through, low and wet, like someone speaking with their lips pressed too close to the mouthpiece. "Do not look under the bed." The words slid into me, soft but sharp enough to cut. My breath stuttered. The line went dead. I sat there with the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that followed. My skin prickled with cold sweat. Slowly, I lowered it back onto the base, careful not to make a sound. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that waits for you to move first. My eyes betrayed me. They drifted toward the edge of the mattress. The cheap bedspread hung low, brushing the stained carpet, just high enough that anything could be hiding underneath. The voice had told me not to look, but that warning crawled through me like bait, daring me, pulling at the thread of my fear. I pressed my back against the headboard, pulling my legs up onto the bed. The air conditioner had stopped rattling, and the silence was now absolute. The kind that makes your heartbeat sound like footsteps. I tried to breathe evenly, tried to convince myself it was a prank call, some cruel joke from the front desk. But deep down, I knew no one had dialed that number tonight. The phone sat still beside me, black and heavy, as if it had never rung at all. Yet the words replayed in my head, over and over, with a voice that sounded less and less like a stranger and more like my own. "Do not look under the bed." I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see what waited in the darkness just inches below my feet. But the longer I stayed awake, the more certain I became that something under there was already looking at me. I told myself I would not give in. I pulled the blanket higher, buried my face against the pillow, and tried to force sleep over the jagged edges of fear. The phone hadn't rung again. The silence, though unnatural, was better than listening to that voice whisper through the receiver. I thought if I ignored it long enough, the warning would dissolve into memory. But then the mattress shifted. It was subtle at first, a faint dip near my feet, as if the springs had groaned under the weight of something crawling beneath. My breath hitched. I froze, body rigid, every nerve screaming that I was not alone. The shift came again, stronger this time, dragging along the length of the bed. It felt like something heavy was moving directly under me, pressing upward just enough to let me know it was there. The cheap bedspread trembled, fabric brushing against the carpet in shallow waves. My chest burned as I tried to breathe quietly. I wanted to believe it was the old frame giving way, that the years of strain had finally bent the coils. But I could feel the rhythm. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. A weight crawling from one end of the mattress to the other, dragging with the patience of something that had waited too long. I gripped the headboard, fighting the urge to leap off the bed. The voice echoed again in my memory, cold and certain. "Do not look under the bed." My throat tightened. The warning wasn't just advice, it was a command. And I knew with a sick certainty that if I bent low enough to look, I would not be the one staring back. The mattress sagged harder beneath me, as though something had pressed its full body flat against the underside. The frame creaked with each movement, whispering in low moans that matched the dragging rhythm. I clamped my teeth shut to keep from crying out, tears prickling hot at the corners of my eyes. The air grew damp, coppery, like the smell of rust or blood. My fingers ached from clinging to the headboard. I thought about running, about flinging myself from the bed to the door. But if I touched the floor, I would be closer to it, exposed, within reach. The dragging stopped. For a moment, the silence returned. I let out a shaky breath, thinking maybe it was gone. Maybe I had imagined it. Then, slowly, impossibly slow, I felt pressure rise in the center of the mattress, right beneath where my back pressed into the thin padding. Something was lifting me. The mattress bowed beneath me, pressing into my spine as though invisible hands were lifting me from below. My nails dug into the headboard, knuckles white, too terrified to move. That was when the phone rang again. The sharp, metallic clang cut through the suffocating silence, jolting me upright. I nearly screamed just from the sound of it. I turned my head slowly toward the nightstand. The black phone trembled as it rang, the cord twitching like a vein under skin. Each ring was louder than the last, drilling into my ears until I thought my skull would split. My body moved on instinct. I grabbed the receiver just to silence it. But when I pressed it to my ear, the world went colder. No static this time, no hiss of distant storms, only a voice. My voice. "Run," it whispered, breaking on the edge of a sob. "Please, you have to run." The sound of myself pleading splintered me in half. My breath faltered, and tears blurred my vision. It wasn't just mimicking me. It was me. My voice fractured and desperate, as though it had been torn from the very bones of my throat and trapped on the line. "Get out!" the voice begged, shaking, ragged, more frantic with every word. "It's under you. It's waiting. Run before it." The line cracked with a violent snap, and the voice cut off mid-sentence. The silence that followed was deafening, but not empty. I could hear the faint scrape again beneath the mattress, the weight shifting back into its slow crawl, as though whatever hid there was laughing in the language of movement. I dropped the receiver. It dangled from its cord, swaying, clicking softly against the side of the table. The sound was unbearable, a cruel echo of what I had just heard. My throat tightened with the taste of iron, fear pressing against my ribs like a vice. I wanted to leap from the bed, to sprint for the door, but my legs refused. My own voice was still in my ears, begging me, warning me, and I was paralyzed between belief and disbelief. The mattress shifted again, heavier now, sagging under the weight of something enormous. The frame groaned, the bed spring screeched, and then, for the first time, I felt fingers curl up from underneath, pressing against the sheet by my side. Long, thin, dragging across the fabric like claws dulling themselves against me. The phone rang again, sudden and violent. The sound rattled the air, rattled my teeth, rattled my skull. I didn't answer this time. I couldn't, because I knew what I would hear. My own voice screaming not to look down. I don't remember leaving the bed. 1 second I was frozen, the weight pressing from beneath me, the phone screaming with my own stolen voice. The next, I was at the door, fumbling the chain free with trembling fingers. My chest burned as I tore it open and stumbled into the hallway, barefoot, half blind with terror. I didn't stop running until I reached the front desk, lungs clawing for air, words spilling from me in broken fragments. The clerk stared as though I had lost my mind, eyes narrowing as I begged him to call the police. My voice cracked as I tried to explain. The phone, the voice, the thing crawling beneath the mattress. He didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He only picked up his own receiver and dialed, his hand shaking slightly as though he already knew. The officers arrived near dawn, their radios crackling against the silence of the hotel. I stood outside, shivering in the gray light, watching as they disappeared into the room I had fled. Time stretched, my body aching with exhaustion, stomach twisting with every tick of the clock. When they finally returned, their faces were pale, unreadable. "There was no phone," one of them said, voice clipped, as though he didn't want to linger. "The line was disconnected years ago. That set's just a prop. Hasn't worked since the building changed owners." The words hit me harder than any scream. I stammered, insisting I had heard it ring, had felt the receiver heavy in my hand, had listened to my own voice whisper warnings that had clawed into my bones. They only exchanged a glance, one officer scratching at his jaw, the other shifting uncomfortably in his boots. "Room's empty," they added, though their eyes flickered, betraying something they weren't saying. No signs of anyone under the bed. No signs of anyone at all. They told me to get some rest, to leave town if I wanted, to forget it. But as I turned to go, I caught sight of one officer's notebook, the words scrawled hurriedly at the bottom of his page. "Sheets stained, mattress sagging, odor present." He snapped it shut before I could read more. I checked out before the sun was high, unable to bear another second in that place. The clerk didn't argue. He slid my key away and avoided my gaze, lips pressed in a tight line. On the drive out of town, the world felt unreal. Every mile a blur of gray asphalt and empty sky. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached, the silence inside the car suffocating. I reached to turn on the radio, anything to break it. Before my fingers touched the dial, the phone beside me rang. The same shrill, metallic scream. And when I looked down at the passenger seat, there it sat, black and heavy, cord coiled like a snake, waiting. And the hotel felt wrong the moment I stepped inside, but I told myself it was just the emptiness. The manager had smiled too wide, his voice too rehearsed when he told me I would be the only guest that week. Off-season, he explained, as though that justified the hollow corridors and the silent dining room. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and dust, a mixture that made me think of furniture sealed away in forgotten houses. My footsteps echoed as I climbed the stairs to my room, the sound ricocheting in ways that suggested more space than the building truly held. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, each one flickering when I passed beneath it, as though reluctant to stay awake. My key turned with ease, and the room greeted me with sheets pulled tight, curtains drawn perfectly, and the faint scent of bleach sharp in my nose. I tried not to dwell on the emptiness. At first, it felt almost comforting. No voices in the halls, no slammed doors, no muffled televisions through thin walls. But by nightfall, the silence pressed too close, a weight I couldn't shake. The building groaned softly, pipes shifting, wood settling, sounds that would have been lost in busier nights, but now seemed amplified. When I woke the next morning, my room was immaculate. The bed had been remade, my suitcase shifted, my toothbrush laid neatly across a folded washcloth. I frowned at the sight. I hadn't asked for housekeeping. I hadn't seen a single staff member besides the manager. The sense of being alone should have been reassuring, but instead it curdled into unease. I told myself it was a mistake. Someone had entered by habit, some staffer following routine despite the lack of guests. Still, I checked the lock twice before leaving for a walk through the empty streets of the town. When I returned hours later, the room was fresh again. The wastebasket emptied, the towels replaced, the bedspread tucked smooth as though no one had ever touched it. That night, I sat in the chair by the window, lights off, waiting. Midnight came and went. The silence was so complete, it was suffocating. My eyelids grew heavy and when they snapped open again, the bed across the room was once more perfectly made, my belongings rearranged with deliberate care. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard footsteps. Yet someone had been inside. The manager's words echoed in my mind. "You are the only guest this week." The phrase twisted now, not a reassurance, but a warning. Because if I was the only guest, who was housekeeping working for? And why did they keep returning when I never asked them to? The second morning was worse than the first. I woke with the sour taste of unrest still on my tongue, sheets tangled around my legs, pillows tossed across the floor. But when I blinked against the gray light leaking through the curtains, the room was spotless. The bed was smoothed to perfection, corners folded sharp enough to cut. The pillows were back in place, puffed and pristine, smelling faintly of starch. It was as though I had never slept there at all. I sat up slowly, my heart thudding. I had not left the room. I had not heard a key turn in the lock. The bolt had still been slid shut when I checked. Yet someone, or something, had moved while I slept, careful enough to erase every trace of me. The thought settled in my stomach like ice. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I had risen in the night, remade the bed in some fog of half-dream, but the folds were too precise, too deliberate. My hands had never known that kind of ritual neatness. Whoever had done it took pride in their work, but not for me. No, it felt more like preparation, like the bed was being arranged for someone else. The third morning, it happened again, and the fourth. Every dawn I woke to the same eerie perfection. The sheets tucked, my scattered clothes folded neatly on the chair, the wastebasket emptied though I had placed nothing in it. Each time, my own mess erased, replaced by a cleanliness that felt less like care and more like possession. I began to test it. One night, I left the bed deliberately ruined, sheets twisted, blanket thrown to the floor. I scrawled a note on the pillow in my own hand. "I am awake. Stay out." I placed a glass of water on the nightstand and balanced a coin on top, certain it would fall if the table was touched. When I woke, the bed was perfect again. The note was gone. The glass was full once more, but the coin was missing. I searched the carpet, my suitcase, even my pockets, but it was nowhere. It had been taken. By then, sleep was impossible. I sat up through the night, lights burning, watching the door. Nothing moved. The knob never turned. Yet when exhaustion overcame me and my eyes closed for only a moment, I woke to find the room changed again. The bed remade. The light switched off. My body covered neatly with the blanket I swore I had thrown aside. It wasn't housekeeping. It wasn't kindness. Whatever tended this room did not want me comfortable. It wanted me contained. And it was patient. Impossibly patient. Waiting for the moment I would stop resisting and let it tuck me in forever. I decided I couldn't stand waking to another perfect bed without knowing how it happened. So I left the lights dim, arranged the covers in disarray, and stretched myself across the mattress with my eyes half-lidded. I forced my breathing into a slow rhythm, shallow enough to mimic sleep. The room was still, the silence pressing so hard against my ears that every thump of my heart sounded like a drum. It was just past midnight when I heard it. The faintest squeal of wheels on worn linoleum. The unmistakable groan of a cart rolling down the hall. My skin prickled, every hair on my arm standing on end. It stopped outside my door, and for a moment, all I could hear was the steady hush of something shifting weight just beyond the wood. The lock clicked. My breath caught, though I kept my chest rising evenly, praying my body sold the illusion of slumber. The door creaked open an inch at a time. That old smell of bleach wafted in, sharp and chemical, mixed with something sour underneath, something rotten. The cart rattled softly as it was pushed inside. I let my eyes slit open just enough to see the shadow stretching long across the floor. It moved with precision, slow, deliberate, like someone accustomed to going unnoticed. I couldn't see her face, only the outline of a figure in a uniform, sleeves rolled high, gloves tight around her hands. She wheeled the cart to the bed, stopping beside me. The springs trembled as she leaned over. I felt the brush of her breath against my cheek, warm and too close. For a moment I thought she knew I was awake, that she would peel my eyes open and smile at finding me pretending. But instead she began to work, her motions fluid, rehearsed. The blanket was tugged straight, my limbs gently shifted as though I were nothing more than another pillow out of place. The sheets pulled tight beneath me without a sound. She smoothed the cover over my chest, her hand lingering there, pressing just long enough to feel my heart beat against her palm. I fought to keep my body limp, to let her believe her ritual was undisturbed. But inside, every nerve screamed. Her fingers finally slid away, and she stepped back. I dared to look through the narrow slit of my eyes and saw her place something on the nightstand, a folded note, written in my own handwriting. Then she turned, cartwheels groaning once more, as she left the room as quietly as she had entered. The door clicked shut, but the silence didn't return. My pulse thundered in my ears as I reached trembling for the note. One sentence scrawled across the paper in my jagged script: "Stop pretending. I know you're awake." The following night, I didn't bother pretending. I lay there rigid, eyes wide in the dark, waiting for the wheels to squeal again. When they finally did, closer now, slower, I felt every muscle in my body coil tight. The cart stopped outside my door, and the lock gave its soft click. The door opened with a sigh, letting the hallway's stale air mingle with the bleach-heavy scent I was beginning to dread. She came in quietly, her shoes whispering against the carpet. I could see her more clearly this time, bathed in the pale glow of the hallway light, spilling through the crack of the door. The uniform was once white, but blotched with dark stains that spread across her chest and arms, stains I knew were not from cleaning products. Her face was gray, hollow, hair plastered against her skull as if damp with sweat that never dried. She wheeled the cart to the side of the bed and leaned over me. My instinct screamed to bolt upright, to claw my way past her and into the hall, but I was trapped under her shadow. Her hands, gloved and tacky with some residue, moved with delicate precision, tugging the sheets taut around my body. Not tucking me in with care, but binding me, folding the corners with the exactness of a burial shroud. The blanket pressed against my chest until my breathing was shallow, my arms pinned tight against my sides. I tried not to move, tried to keep my breathing steady, but my heart hammered against the fabric, and I knew she could feel it. Her head tilted, and a slow, broken smile stretched across her face. "Still," she whispered, voice soft as moth wings. "Always still." She smoothed the sheet once more, palms gliding over me as though she were sealing me into the mattress itself. The smell of iron clung to her hands, sharp and undeniable. My stomach lurched with the realization that those stains on her uniform had not come from accidents, but from guests before me, guests who had never left. Her face hovered inches from mine, her breath warm and rancid. My body screamed to move, to fight, but the weight of the sheets and her presence pinned me harder than rope. Her hand lingered at my throat, just above the sheet's edge, fingers brushing lightly as though measuring the rhythm of my pulse. She hummed softly, almost a lullaby, as though my terror was a song she knew by heart. Then, with one last stroke across the fabric, she whispered, "Perfect," and stepped back into the shadows. I didn't dare move until the wheels of her cart creaked toward the door. But even then, I stayed bound beneath the sheets, breathing shallow, realizing with a fresh wave of dread that she hadn't made the bed for me to sleep in. She had made it for me to be buried in. The moment she turned back toward me, I lost control. The scream tore from my throat, raw and jagged, louder than I thought possible, a sound that scraped the walls of the room. I thrashed against the sheets, trying to tear myself free, trying to throw her off. But she only tilted her head and smiled as though my panic amused her. I lunged for the door, dragging the blanket tangled around my legs. My hand slammed against the knob, twisting until my skin burned. It wouldn't turn. The bolt rattled, but no give. Locked, from the outside. My chest heaved, my scream breaking into sobs as the truth sank in. I had never been able to leave this room at all. The cart squealed closer, the wheels shuddering against the carpet as she pushed it to the foot of the bed. She moved slowly, unhurried, humming that same broken lullaby that had turned my blood to ice the night before. The stains on her uniform looked darker now, fresh, glistening as though they had never dried. Her hands, gloved and tacky, reached for me again. I pressed myself flat against the door, heart pounding so loud I thought it might split me open. She bent low, her face drifting into the light leaking from the hallway. And that was when I saw it. The name tag pinned crookedly to her chest. It bore my name. Not my first, not my last, but both, etched in neat black letters as though it had always belonged there. My knees buckled, my scream caught in my throat. I shook my head, muttering that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. But the badge gleamed in the dim light, undeniable. She touched it with one gloved finger and then pointed at me, her smile widening until her lips cracked. "You belong here," she whispered, my name echoing like a verdict. The room seemed to pulse with her words, the air thickening until it suffocated me. The walls groaned, the ceiling sagged, the carpet darkened underfoot like something beneath it was stirring. The bed sat open, sheets folded back neatly, waiting, a coffin dressed in fabric and bleach. I clawed at the door, slamming my fists against the wood until my knuckles bled. No one came. No footsteps in the hall, no voices. Only her humming, steady, patient, as though she had all the time in the world to make me understand. The sheets rustled behind me, folding themselves as if guided by unseen hands, crisp and sharp, waiting for me to return. And in the hum of the air conditioner and the creak of the old pipes, I heard her voice weaving through the silence, chanting my name again and again until it was no longer a sound, but a truth. The room was mine now, and I would never leave. The hotel looked like something out of another century, its stone walls weathered but proud, its arched windows glowing with warm light against the fading sky. I had chosen it for its charm, the kind of place where history pressed close, where the air still carried whispers of grander times. It felt right for an anniversary, something timeless to mark another year together. The photographs online had promised elegance and faded grandeur. Ballrooms with chandeliers, velvet curtains, and polished floors. When we arrived, the lobby smelled of wax and wood polish, a sweetness that reminded me of old churches. The receptionist, dressed in a uniform that looked as though it belonged to another decade, slid the brass key across the counter with a practiced smile. There was no modern card swipe, no blinking lights, only the weight of the key in my palm and the etched number on its tag. I told myself it was all part of the experience, part of the hotel's historic charm. The corridors were lined with portraits, smiling brides and stern grooms, wedding parties frozen in black and white, eyes that seemed to follow as we passed. Some frames were cracked, glass clouded with dust. But the faces were sharp, too sharp, their expressions lingering long after we had turned the corner. Our room was beautiful in the way old things often are. Imperfect, but alive. Heavy drapes brushed the floor, a four-poster bed draped in lace, a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar when I pulled it open. The walls were painted with flowers that had faded almost to shadows, but even in their dimness, they seemed to bloom again in the low light. We dined in the hotel restaurant that evening, the food rich, the wine deep and sweet. For a moment, I forgot the odd quiet of the place, forgot how few other guests we had seen. The staff moved silently, their uniforms too pristine, their eyes avoiding ours just a little too carefully. It wasn't until we returned to the room, full and content, that I noticed the faint sound drifting through the floorboards. Music. A waltz, lilting and slow, carried on strings that seemed too alive to be a recording. I opened the window, thinking it must come from the town below. But the streets were silent, dark, but for the weak glow of a single street lamp. When I pressed my ear to the floor, the music was clearer. A violin, a piano, footsteps tapping in rhythm across polished wood. A ballroom alive with sound. I laughed softly, told myself there must have been an event, some late-night gathering in one of the old halls. But when I asked the receptionist about it later, her smile faltered. She lowered her gaze to the desk, her voice barely audible as she said, "The ballroom has been closed since 1972. The words clung to me long after I left the front desk. Closed since 1972. Yet the melody still floated through the air, faint but insistent, winding its way through the walls as though it had been waiting for ears to catch it. I told myself it had to be some trick of acoustics, an old pipe groaning, a recording someone had left playing on repeat. But even as I tried to explain it away, the rhythm of footsteps carried on beneath the floor, steady and deliberate, the unmistakable cadence of dancers. Back in the room, I lay awake while the music grew clearer. It was not a song I knew, but it felt familiar, as though I had heard it once in another lifetime. The notes weaving around my thoughts until I found myself humming along without meaning to. My partner had drifted to sleep, breathing softly beside me, but I was caught in its pull, listening to the distant laughter that sometimes rose with the strings. A low, warm murmur of voices, full of celebration, threaded with something sharper. Curiosity gnawed at me. I slipped out of bed, bare feet pressing against the cool floor, and followed the sound through the corridor. The portraits of long-dead brides and grooms stared as I passed. Their painted mouths twisted into smiles that seemed wider than before, as though they knew where I was going. The music swelled, guiding me like a hand at the small of my back, down the staircase and toward the farthest wing of the hotel. The hallway narrowed as I approached the ballroom doors. Dust thickened along the walls, cobwebs stretched high in the corners. Yet the sound spilling from beyond was as vibrant as if the room had never been abandoned. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to resist, but it turned easily in my hand. The doors did not open. They shuddered, trembling as though something pressed against them from the other side. For a moment, I thought I saw the wood ripple, like hands were pushing outward, eager to be let through. I stumbled back, pulse racing, the melody collapsing into a single sustained note that seemed to hum inside my skull. When I finally forced myself upstairs, I found the bed perfectly made, my partner still sleeping soundly. I crawled beneath the covers, shivering, but the music didn't fade. It lingered, louder now, no longer beneath the floorboards, but inside the very walls of our room. And as I closed my eyes, too afraid to move, I felt the faint brush of a gloved hand take mine in the dark. A hand that led me, gently, insistently, into the rhythm of a dance I had never agreed to join. The doors gave way with a groan, as though they had not been touched in decades. But inside was no ruin. Candlelight blazed in chandeliers overhead, their flames unshaken by any draft, their glow painting the ballroom in gold. The music swelled, violins and piano alive, and laughter rose in waves. For a heartbeat, I thought the clerk had lied, that the room had never closed at all. Then I saw the dancers. They spun and glided across the polished floor, but their gowns and suits sagged in tatters. Lace shredded, satin yellowed with age, silk crumbling into threads as they twirled. Veils clung to hair that fell in dry clumps, tiaras bent and rusted. Their shoes clicked against the floor, though half were missing heels, half worn to nothing. And beneath their finery, their faces were pale, hollow, cheeks sunken, mouths stretched in smiles too wide, too stiff, their eyes glazed yet unblinking. They moved with elegance, every step perfectly rehearsed, but their movements carried the stiffness of bodies long past life. Each spin sent dust and flakes of fabric into the air, as though they were shedding what little held them together. Still, they danced, unbroken, as though the party had never ended. I froze in the doorway, the breath caught sharp in my throat. A dozen heads turned toward me at once, their glassy eyes fixing on my figure. Yet their feet never faltered. Their bodies never ceased their endless waltz. They smiled wider, as though my presence was what they had been waiting for. The air grew heavy with the smell of mildew and something sweeter, cloying, like old flowers left too long in stagnant water. My vision swam, but I couldn't look away. One of the dancers, a woman with her gown shredded to ribbons, lifted her arm in invitation. Her skin was paper thin, veins black and twisting beneath it. But her gesture was graceful, commanding. My legs moved against my will. I stepped forward, my shoes tapping against the floor in rhythm with theirs. The music swelled to greet me, wrapping around me like an embrace. I told myself to turn back, to run, but the pull of the song drowned every thought. Closer now, I saw their mouths opening as they spun. They were not smiling. They were whispering, chanting words in unison beneath the waltz, voices dry as ash. I strained to catch the sound, and my blood froze when I did. They were reciting a name, my name, over and over, each twirl punctuated by it, each dip carrying it forward like a vow. The woman's hand reached for mine, her fingers cold and damp as they slid against my palm. And when she pulled me into the circle of dancers, the room erupted in applause, a chorus of decaying voices, celebrating as if the wedding had finally begun. The circle of dancers tightened around me, their rotted gowns brushing against my clothes, their shoes tapping in a rhythm that felt less like music and more like a summons. The smell of earth and mildew grew heavier, as if the ballroom itself were a tomb cracked open, spilling its dead into motion. I wanted to pull free, to shove past the woman who had taken my hand. But the strength in her grip was iron. Her bones, harder than flesh, had any right to be. Then he appeared, a groom, tall and skeletal, his suit eaten through with moth holes, his boutonniere shriveled into a black husk. His jaw hung too loose, clicking as he moved, and when he bent low before me, I saw the remnants of skin clinging stubbornly to bone. He extended his hand with surprising grace, head bowing as though this was the most sacred of rituals. "We need a new partner," he whispered, the words leaking out like wind through broken glass. The violins shrieked higher, the piano pounding beneath their wail, the chant of my name swelling until it drowned my pulse. My body trembled as his hand hovered inches from mine, the invitation impossible to refuse. The dancers pressed closer, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their mouths whispering in unison, their smiles stretched thin. I tried to shake my head, to force words through my throat, but nothing came. The skeletal groom's fingers brushed mine, cold as stone, and I gasped at the shock of it. He seized my hand fully then, pulling me from the woman's grasp, claiming me as his partner. The applause that followed was deafening, a chorus of brittle bones clapping against decayed flesh. He spun me once, his movement stiff but commanding. My feet moved against my will, sliding across the polished floor in perfect time with his steps. Each turn dragged me deeper into the circle, until the crowd of dancers pressed around us, their gowns disintegrating in clouds of dust, their whispers filling my ears. The groom leaned close, his breath damp and foul against my face. "You will stay," he murmured, jaw clicking with each word. "The music needs you. The party must never end." My vision blurred, the chandeliers above warping into halos of fire. The floor pulsed beneath my feet like a beating heart, keeping time with the song. I struggled, twisting against his grip, but the harder I fought, the tighter his hand clamped around mine. His other arm wrapped around my waist, bony fingers digging deep, locking me in place. The dancers cheered louder, their voices rising in a cacophony that swallowed the music whole. My name was no longer a whisper. It was a vow, a chant, a curse. The skeletal groom bent his face close to mine, and through the hollow clatter of his teeth, he hissed one final promise. "You are ours now." The groom's grip was iron, but terror gave me strength. I wrenched myself free, the sound of bones cracking under my pull, and stumbled backward through the circle of dancers. Their whispers swelled to shrieks, gowns trailing dust as they reached for me with skeletal hands. I bolted, heart clawing at my ribs, the music chasing me with its relentless rhythm. The ballroom doors yawned open when I struck, them as if eager to let me flee, and I tore down the corridor, shoes slipping on the polished floor. My breaths came ragged, my chest burning, but I didn't dare stop. The portraits lining the walls blurred past me, their painted smiles stretched wider now, their painted eyes alive with knowing hunger. I rounded a corner, searching for the stairs when I saw it, the long gilt mirror that hung between the sconces. My reflection hit me like a blow. It was me, but not. The dress clung to my body in lace and satin, veil cascading from my head, bouquet rotting in my hands. My lips moved, though I spoke no words, smiling in a way I could not command. I screamed and turned from it, but every corner revealed another mirror, another reflection waiting. Each one showed me deeper in the dress, first standing proud, then walking the aisle, then lifting my hand to meet the skeletal groom's. The images moved even when I stood still, as though rehearsing a wedding I had never agreed to. I clawed at the walls, desperate to find an exit, but the hall stretched longer with every step. Mirrors bloomed from the wallpaper, endless, trapping me between my shifting selves. My face was pale beneath the veil, my smile splitting wider in every reflection, until it became a rictus grin, a mask stretched too tight. Behind me, the music grew louder, closer, The dancer's footsteps tapped in unison, following me, pulling me back into rhythm. My body lurched, legs faltering, and for one horrific second, my own reflection reached out of the glass, fingers pressing against the surface as though the barrier no longer held. I stumbled backward, colliding with another mirror, and the cold surface rippled under my skin like water. The figure inside, myself in the gown, pressed against me, lips moving with a vow I could not hear but felt etched into my bones. I turned, running blind, but there was no escape. Mirrors lined the hall, mirrors stacked upon mirrors, each reflecting the bride I was becoming. The bouquet crumbled in my hands, petals falling to the floor, and my veil dragged heavy behind me, though nothing clung to my head. The last sound I heard before the lights snapped out was the cheer of the wedding party, rising as one. And in the blackness that followed, I felt lace tighten around my throat like a vow being sealed forever. The elevator door slid open with a chime that felt too cheerful for the hour. I pressed the button for my room's floor, but the light above flickered and went dead. Instead, the panel lit a number that shouldn't have worked at all. The doors parted to reveal a corridor marked with a heavy sign, closed for renovation. I hesitated, thumb brushing my keycard. Somehow, it had triggered this. The card shouldn't have worked. Those levels were locked to guests. But the hallway stretched before me, dark and waiting. Curiosity cut sharper than caution. I stepped out. The air was stale, heavy with dust, as though the floor had been sealed off for years. My shoes crunched over fragments of plaster littering the carpet, once vibrant but now dulled to gray. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling like dead skin, exposing raw concrete beneath. The overhead lights buzzed weakly, only a few sputtering to life, throwing the hall into a patchwork of dim pools and long shadows. Doors lined the corridor, each one numbered in faded brass. Some hung crookedly from their hinges, others bolted tight, as though whatever had been left behind inside was meant never to escape. I passed one door and froze at the faint smell seeping from the crack beneath it, something sweet, rotting, the smell of fruit left too long in the heat. My stomach turned, but I forced my legs to keep moving. Every sound was amplified, the distant creak of pipes, the moan of the building settling, the whisper of my own breath. But then came something else, faint but distinct. Footsteps. They were ahead of me, too light to be work boots, too measured to be coincidence. I called out, my voice cracking in the stale air. No answer. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a soft dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My throat tightened. I turned back toward the elevator, but the doors were already sliding shut, sealing me into the silence. The air felt heavier now, pressing at my chest. I gripped my keycard so tightly it bent, as though the small rectangle could save me. I told myself I'd only walk to the end of the hall, only look once, then turn back. But with each step, the shadows thickened, pooling around the doors, swallowing the edges of the hallway until it felt less like a hotel and more like a tunnel that had never seen light. And at the very end, where the last flickering bulb buzzed like an insect trapped in glass, I saw a door standing open. Inside, only darkness waited, deeper than anything the weak lights could touch. I should have turned then. I should have run. Instead, I leaned forward, peering into the black. That was when I heard the door behind me shut with a soft click, followed by the turn of a lock. The air was thicker here, damp in a way that clung to my throat and made every breath feel sour. My shoes sank into the carpet, not soft but spongy, the padding beneath rotted and swollen with years of water damage. The threadbare weave scratched against my soles, fraying under the slightest pressure, as if it had been walked upon by countless others who had never left. The walls sweated. Strips of wallpaper sagged downward, dripping with mildew, dark stains bleeding through in shapes that looked disturbingly like handprints pressed from the other side. Water streaks carved lines from ceiling to floor, some fresh, some so old they had become part of the pattern. I lifted my fingers to one of the streaks, and the dampness clung to my skin, sticky, as if it was more than water. Overhead, bulbs flickered with a rhythmic buzz, giving the illusion of movement in the corners of my vision. Every time the light stuttered, I swore I saw the hall stretch longer, the doors multiplying, their brass numbers corroded into illegible smears. It was as though the building was rearranging itself between each blink of light, waiting for me to notice too late. The smell was worse than before. Not just mildew, but the sweetness of rot, cloying and thick, like flowers left in a sealed coffin. It crawled into my nostrils, coated my tongue, until the urge to gag became almost unbearable. I pulled my shirt collar over my mouth, but it did nothing. The air itself was spoiled. I pressed on, my steps unnervingly loud against the silence. At intervals, I passed housekeeping carts left to decay in the hallway. Their cloth bags were torn open, spilling towels stained yellow and gray, bottles of cleaner that had long since leaked into oily puddles. One cart carried a bundle of sheets folded neatly, though the fabric was damp, spotted with something darker that had dried into stiff patches. From behind one of the closed doors came a sound. Not footsteps this time, not dragging, breathing. Long, deep inhales, steady and patient, as though someone stood just on the other side, listening as I passed. I stopped, heart hammering, eyes locked on the warped wood. For one terrifying second, the door seemed to bulge outward with the force of that breath, as if it were not a barrier at all, but lungs expanding. I forced myself onward, every step heavier than the last. The end of the hall loomed closer, a single exit sign flickering red above a stairwell door. Relief bloomed in me, fragile and trembling. But as I reached for the handle, the wallpaper beside it swelled, a wet bubble tearing open with a hiss. And from the darkness beneath the paper, a pale hand pressed outward, fingers splayed wide as if reaching for mine. The first door I dared to open gave way with a groan, hinges screaming as though I had woken something that wanted to stay asleep. The room smelled stale, heavy with dust, but underneath lingered another scent, faint perfume gone sour with time. The bedspread was moth-eaten, sagging under its own weight. But what caught my eye was the suitcase propped neatly at the foot of the bed. Its leather was cracked, tags still dangling from the handle, the name faded into nothing. When I unlatched it, the hinges resisted, but inside lay clothing folded carefully, as though its owner had intended to return at any moment. I shut it quickly, unease gnawing deeper, but curiosity drove me to the next room, and the next. Each one was the same. A coat still hung on the back of a chair. A pair of shoes stood side by side, their leather splitting, laces brittle. A hatbox rested on a dresser, its ribbon frayed but tied with care. Every space looked paused, not abandoned. Lives interrupted mid-motion, their owners never returning to claim what was theirs. Then came the toys. A rocking horse sat in one room, its paint peeling, but its glass eyes bright in the dark. A doll lay face down on a pillow, its porcelain cheek cracked, hair tangled into knots. In the corner of another room, a small wooden train waited on a circle of track, its wheels dusted with years of neglect. I stepped carefully, each toy a relic that felt too fresh, as though the children who had left them had only stepped out into the hall. What unsettled me most was the lack of decay where there should have been. The suitcases remained upright, clothes still folded, shoes still aligned neatly, toys waiting to be played with. It was as though the decades that had ravaged the carpet and walls had politely spared these belongings, holding them in stasis, as if the floor itself wanted them preserved. In one room, I found a dress draped over the back of a chair, its lace yellowed but intact. A faint mark lingered on the carpet beneath it, the shape of 2 feet pressed into the fabric, worn deeper than the rest of the floor, as though someone had stood there, waiting for far too long. My stomach tightened as I backed away, shutting the door before I could imagine who or what might still be waiting. I moved faster now, opening door after door, the belongings repeating like echoes, suitcases, coats, toys, always neat, always untouched. The air grew heavier with each discovery, as though the weight of all those abandoned lives pressed into my lungs. By the time I reached the end of the hall, my hands shook so badly I could barely grip the handle. I pushed it open, praying for emptiness. Instead, dozens of suitcases were stacked to the ceiling, pressed against the walls, piled like bricks, and every single one bore a tag. Every single one had my name. The next hallway bent sharply, narrower than the others, the ceiling low enough that the light flickered directly into my eyes. The air was colder here, touched with something metallic, and for a moment I thought the walls themselves were wet again. But as I drew closer, I saw it wasn't mildew this time. It was photographs. They were pinned in uneven rows along the faded wallpaper, tacked one after another until there was no space left. Black and white at first, the edges curled, faces frozen in old-fashioned collars and dresses. Then came sepia, then color, the timeline unfolding as I walked. Families with suitcases in hand, businessmen shaking hands at the desk, children holding toys I had seen only minutes before. Every guest who had stayed here. The farther I moved, the clearer the faces became. The newer ones looked recent, too recent. Smiling people in clothes I recognized, modern luggage at their feet. Some still bore the faint glare of flash photography, as though the film had barely dried. I leaned closer to one, the image of a man holding a brass key with a tag I had seen on this floor. His smile was stiff, his eyes uneasy. I reached the final wall and froze. My own face stared back at me. The photograph was pinned at eye level, centered as though it were the prize of the collection. I stood at the reception desk, suitcase in hand, my expression dazed and weary, the way I must have looked just hours earlier. My throat tightened. I had not posed for this. No one had taken it. Yet there I was, preserved in perfect detail, captured in a moment I had never consented to. My fingers shook as I reached toward the photo, wanting to tear it free, to crumple it, to deny its existence. But the paper felt damp beneath my touch, warm almost, as though it had only just been printed. My hand recoiled as if burned. Behind me, the hall whispered. The photographs rustled softly, though there was no wind. I turned and saw eyes following me. The faces in the older photos seemed to shift, smiles curving wider, pupils darkening. I felt them watching, not just through the ink, but through the very walls. A sound broke through the silence then, sharp and deliberate, the click of a camera shutter. My blood ran cold. The flash had no light, but I felt it burn across my skin. Slowly, with dread pooling in my stomach, I turned toward the source. At the far end of the hall stood a camera on a tripod, its lens glinting in the weak light. The instant my eyes locked on it, the machine clicked again. And this time, I didn't have to look to know my new photograph was already pinned to the wall. I ran, though I could not say where. The halls folded into one another, doors repeating, wallpaper sagging like wet skin. The photographs whispered as I passed, their paper edges fluttering as though they wanted to peel from the walls and follow. My lungs burned, my heart hammering against the cage of my ribs. But the sound of footsteps trailed me no matter how fast I moved. Soft, steady, perfectly in time with mine. When I finally stumbled into the elevator lobby, it felt like salvation. The doors waited open, the interior glowing with a dim light, humming as though it had been waiting only for me. I didn't hesitate. I hurled myself inside, nearly collapsing against the back wall, slamming my hand against the button for the lobby. The doors closed with a soft hiss, cutting off the whispers, cutting off the scent of mildew and rot. For the first time since stepping onto that floor, I breathed, though the air was no cleaner here. I stared at the panel, willing the numbers to descend, to carry me back to where reality might still exist. But the buttons flickered erratically, numbers winking in and out until none of them glowed at all. The car groaned, shuddered, and began to move. Down, I thought. Please, down. But the sensation in my stomach told me otherwise. We were rising, higher and higher, past the numbered floors, into something unnamed. The display above the doors blinked once, then settled on a blank red square, the same mark I had seen when I first arrived here. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the wall, whispering to myself that I had only taken a wrong turn, that my keycard had malfunctioned, that this was nothing more than an old building with too many secrets. But the lies tasted bitter. I thought of the suitcases, the toys, the photographs, proof of lives erased and preserved, proof that I was not the first to walk this way. The elevator slowed. My breath caught and I braced for the doors to open. But they did not. Instead, the light inside flickered, dimmed, then died entirely. I was swallowed in darkness, the hum of the motor fading until silence pressed against my ears. And then, faint, beneath the black, came the sound of a bell. Not the cheerful chime of a modern elevator, but the toll of something older, heavier, a funeral bell. The doors began to part, creaking, revealing nothing but deeper shadow beyond. My reflection shimmered faintly on the metal walls. Only it wasn't mine anymore. The figure staring back wore a bellhop's uniform, a brass name tag pinned crookedly to its chest. The name etched there was my own. The doors slammed shut before I could move, trapping me inside, carrying me somewhere I knew I had never meant to go. And in that moment, I was no longer sure I had checked into the right hotel at all. And the room greeted me with the sterile neatness of any budget hotel. Fresh sheets tucked too tightly, the smell of detergent and lemon polish clinging to every surface. The television remote wrapped in plastic as though untouched by human hands. For a moment, I felt the dull comfort of routine. One night, maybe two, and then I would leave this place behind. But when I lay back on the bed, letting my eyes drift across the ceiling, I saw it. A blotch, darker than the pale paint around it, directly above me. At first, I thought it was water damage, some leak from the floor above. The shape wasn't smooth, though. It feathered outward like veins, spreading across the plaster in jagged lines. I told myself not to stare. But the more I looked, the more the color revealed itself. Not gray, not brown, but red. The kind of red that sinks into fabric, stains hands, lingers even after you've scrubbed. My mouth went dry. I rose from the bed, craning my neck to see it more clearly. The stain was centered almost perfectly above where my body had rested, as though whoever had left it there had been in the same position. I could almost imagine someone pinned to the ceiling, bleeding out in slow drips, absorbed into plaster and paint. The silence of the room pressed in. I wanted to laugh it off, to call the front desk and demand another room. But my throat felt locked. Something about that stain made the idea of leaving unbearable, as if walking out would mean turning my back on it. And I wasn't sure it would let me. So I sat on the edge of the bed, staring upward, waiting for it to reveal itself. Minutes crawled into hours, and the light from the lamp threw the stain into deeper contrast, making it seem fresher than before. I told myself I'd sleep, ignore it, forget it. But when I finally lay back down, I swore the lines had shifted, spreading wider across the plaster. The shape was no longer random. It was beginning to resemble something. A hand. Fingers stretched open, reaching down. I pulled the blanket to my chin, but I could not shut my eyes, because the longer I stared, the more certain I became that the stain was not a remnant of something past. It was still forming. It was still alive. By morning, my eyes ached from lack of sleep, but the stain hadn't faded. If anything, it seemed darker, sharper against the pale ceiling, its edges curling outward like veins searching for more space. I couldn't take it anymore. I dressed quickly and went down to the front desk, rehearsing my demand for another room, some explanation, anything that might ease the weight pressing in on me. The clerk looked up from a ledger when I spoke, her smile too calm, too rehearsed. I told her about the mark above my bed, the spreading red lines that had kept me awake all night. Her expression didn't shift at all. She only nodded once, slowly, as if I had reminded her of something she'd nearly forgotten. "That stain has always been there," she said, her voice flat. The words slid into me colder than the air conditioning humming through the lobby. I blinked, waiting for her to continue, to explain that the building was old, that the maintenance staff had given up on fixing it. But she didn't. She simply turned the page of her book, pen scratching across the paper as though our conversation was finished. I pressed her again, asking if I could change rooms, if maybe there was another space available without the mark. Her eyes flicked to mine then, just for a heartbeat, and I saw something in them. Not annoyance, not pity, but fear. Fear carefully hidden beneath the mask of her hospitality. "I'm sorry," she murmured, though her tone carried no warmth. "Every room has its own history. You'll get used to it." I wanted to argue, but something in the way she said it drained the strength from me. It wasn't reassurance. It was a warning. I returned to my room on legs that felt hollow, hands trembling as I unlocked the door. The moment I stepped inside, the smell struck me. Iron and mildew, faint but undeniable. My eyes rose instinctively, and the stain was waiting. Darker now, deeper, the hand-like shape more defined. The fingers stretched farther toward the edges of the ceiling, curling like claws reaching down. I shut the door, my breath ragged. It wasn't just a blemish, not just damage from some old leak. It was spreading inch by inch, and no one cared. No one wanted to care. I dropped into the chair by the window, unable to tear my gaze from it. And as the light shifted through the curtains, I swore the stain pulsed faintly, like a wound that refused to close. The clerk's words echoed inside me, relentless. It has always been there. If that was true, then it wasn't a stain at all. It was a witness. And it had been waiting for me long before I ever checked in. Sleep was impossible, but exhaustion finally dragged me down, pulling me into a restless half-dream. The hum of the air conditioner blurred with the groans of the building until I didn't know what was real. I lay on my side, eyes closed, when something wet kissed my cheek. I sat up instantly. The pillow was damp. My hand came away slick, and when I lifted it to the light, my breath caught. Dark streaks glistened across my palm. Warm, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. Above me, the stain had changed again. It was no longer flat against the ceiling, but bulging, sagging downward as though the plaster itself were softening under the weight of whatever pressed from above. The lines that had once looked like fingers now reached lower, stretching toward me in jagged rivulets. From one of the cracks at its center, another drop formed, heavy and trembling before falling. It struck the pillow with a sound far too loud for its size, sinking instantly into the fabric. I shoved the pillow away, heart hammering, and staggered toward the far corner of the room. My breath was shallow, uneven, as though the air itself had thickened with the iron scent filling my lungs. The stain pulsed in the lamplight, each vein glowing faintly before darkening again, like a heartbeat too large for the ceiling to contain. The drops came faster now, one after another, spattering the sheets, the floorboards, the chair by the window. Each was warm when it landed, as if fresh, as if the ceiling itself bled into the room. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle the scream rising in my throat. I thought of calling the front desk, demanding help. But the memory of the clerk's expression stopped me cold. She had known. She had expected this. And whatever dripped from above wasn't something they would ever clean. I backed into the corner, eyes locked on the sagging ceiling as the sound of liquid hitting fabric filled the silence. The drops splashed in irregular patterns now, almost deliberate, as though spelling something across the sheets. When I dared to look, my stomach clenched. The lines spreading across the bed were no longer random stains. They curved into letters, shaky but clear, writing a word over and over. Stay. The final drop fell onto my hand, where it gripped the wall. It was hotter than the rest, searing, as if it had been waiting just for me. And in that burning touch, I knew the stain wasn't finished. It wasn't leaking. It was feeding. I couldn't take it anymore. The dripping, the smell, the feeling of being watched even when I tried to keep my eyes shut. Something in me snapped. I dragged the chair from the corner to the center of the room, right beneath the sagging stain, my hands trembling so violently the wooden legs scraped across the floor in a shriek. Climbing up, I steadied myself, the ceiling now only inches above me. The plaster was cracked in a spiderweb of fine lines, each one dark with whatever, seeped through. I leaned closer, squinting into the largest split, the one where the drops had begun to fall. That was when it moved. The crack widened with a soft tearing sound, plaster dust raining down into my hair. At first, I thought I was seeing the glint of water behind it, something reflecting the weak light from the lamp. But then it blinked. An eye, wet, unblinking, pressed against the narrow split, staring directly into mine. I gasped, jerking backward, nearly toppling from the chair. But morbid curiosity dragged me forward again. It wasn't just any eye, it was bloodshot, veined with deep red, the iris too dark to make out clearly. It rolled slowly, as though adjusting, trying to focus, before locking on me with unbearable intensity. The dripping quickened, running down the sides of the crack like tears. The air filled with a thick scent of iron, so sharp it coated the back of my throat. I gagged but couldn't look away. That gaze pinned me in place, holding me to the chair as though invisible hands pressed down on my shoulders. The eye darted, scanning the room, then returned to me. I could feel it behind my ribs, weighing my heart, clawing through my thoughts. My breath came ragged, shallow, like it was pacing me, forcing me to match its rhythm. I whispered a broken word, "Why?" But the ceiling answered in silence. Only the sound of the plaster groaning, shifting, widening. Another crack split open nearby, and for a heartbeat I thought another eye would appear. But instead came the curve of something else, skin pale and damp, bulging outward as if whatever hid above the ceiling was pressing harder, straining to come through. The chair wobbled beneath me, the floor tilting with the weight of my fear. I leapt down, stumbling, eyes still fixed on the crack overhead. The eye blinked once more, slow, deliberate, as if promising it had seen enough. Then it rolled upward, disappearing into the dark behind the plaster. But I knew it hadn't left. It was waiting, patient, watching through other cracks I hadn't yet found. And the worst thought of all was this: maybe it hadn't been the first to look down. Maybe every guest who had lain in this bed had been stared at the same way. The night stretched longer than any I had ever known. I sat in the chair by the window, too afraid to lie beneath that ceiling again, my eyes burning as I tried to stay awake. Every creak of the plaster made me flinch. Every drip that struck the floor made me taste iron on my tongue. The memory of that eye lingered, hovering in the darkness above me even after it had rolled away. Somewhere between terror and exhaustion, I must have drifted. My head jerked awake to the thin light of dawn, gray and weak through the curtains. For a moment, I felt relief, until I turned toward the bed. The sheets were soaked. The red stain was no longer confined to the ceiling. It had spread downward, across the plaster, through the mattress, into the blankets. The bed looked drowned in it, every fold heavy, clinging, saturated with something that glistened, wet and dark. The pillow I had shoved aside was half submerged, sagging like it had been pressed into a pool. A smell filled the room, sweet, metallic, suffocating. And yet, when I raised my eyes to the ceiling, it was clean, perfectly smooth, freshly painted white, not a crack or blemish to be found, as though nothing had ever bled through, as though the night before had been a fever dream. But the bed told the truth. I crept closer, hand trembling as I reached toward the soaked sheets. The moment my fingers brushed them, warmth clung to my skin, sticky, undeniable. I recoiled, bile burning in my throat. My footprints stained the carpet as I staggered back, leaving smears where the wetness clung to my soles. I thought of the clerk's voice, calm and cold as she said it had always been there. I thought of the eye pressed against the crack, watching, choosing. And in that moment, I realized the stain hadn't been content to stay above. It had come down to claim me, to wrap itself around the place where I slept, to ensure there was no leaving untouched. The ceiling gleamed in the weak daylight, flawless, indifferent, waiting for the next guest. I stumbled from the room, suitcase forgotten, refusing to look back. But even in the brightness of morning, as I passed through the lobby and into the street, I swore I could still smell it on my skin, that sweet, metallic rot. And I knew, with a certainty that hollowed me to the bone, that the ceiling had reset for someone else. Smooth again, spotless again, ready to wait. The stain was mine now. It had followed me out. And wherever I go, sooner or later, I will look up and see it spreading above my bed. The lock blinked green, and the door gave with a soft click. I pushed it open, dragging my own suitcase behind me, bone-deep weary from the long drive. The air inside smelled faintly of fresh detergent, the hum of the air conditioner whispering in the corner. For a moment, it seemed like every other hotel room I had ever collapsed into. Then I saw it. A suitcase. Not mine. It sat neatly by the bed, upright, its handle extended as though someone had only just wheeled it inside. The tag dangled loosely, stained and smudged from travel, but the name was blurred beyond reading. I froze in the doorway, my hand still on the knob, the weight of unease already sinking into my stomach. I stepped in slowly, my eyes darting to the corners of the room. The bed was made. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar, light spilling faintly from within. My chest tightened. If the suitcase wasn't mine, then someone else had been given this key. Someone else was already staying here. I told myself it was a mix-up, a mistake at the front desk. It had happened before. I had once opened a room to find a stranger snoring on the bed. But the silence here was wrong. Heavy. The kind of silence that listens back. I wheeled my bag inside, set it against the wall, and leaned toward the suitcase by the bed. It was scuffed, battered by countless trips, but it didn't look abandoned. It looked placed, positioned just so, like a prop waiting for me to notice it. My fingers brushed the zipper, hesitation making me pause. From the bathroom came the faintest sound, a drip, a shuffle. My breath caught. I turned my head, every muscle locking tight. The sliver of light beneath the door quivered as though someone moved inside. I backed toward the hall, my voice thin as I called out. No answer. Just that same heavy silence, pressing harder now, thick with presence. I should have left then. I should have gone straight back to the desk and demanded another room. But curiosity is a cruel thing. I crouched by the suitcase, fingers trembling as I lifted the zipper. The teeth groaned apart, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. Inside lay clothes, folded neatly. Shirts, trousers, a pair of shoes tucked at the bottom. All of it clean, pressed, untouched. But the top layer froze me cold, a jacket I recognized, my own. I stumbled back, my breath tearing from my lungs. My suitcase hadn't been opened. My bag still sat zipped against the wall. And yet, here was my jacket, folded with care inside luggage that wasn't mine. The bathroom light flickered, and the sound of the shuffle came again. Louder now, closer, as if whoever carried my clothes in their bag was finally ready to step out and meet me. My first thought was that I had wandered into the wrong room, that fatigue and nerves had tangled me up, made me careless. I staggered back toward the door, heart hammering, fumbling for the brass numbers mounted above the frame. The digits gleamed faintly in the hallway's dim light. I held my keycard up beside them, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Same number. Perfect match. This was my room. The air grew heavier with that realization, pressing in around me until even breathing felt wrong. I turned back toward the suitcase, its zipper still gaping where I had left it, my own jacket folded neatly on top. It sat there innocently, as though mocking me, daring me to look deeper. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I gripped the handle of my own bag and yanked it closer, desperate to reassure myself it hadn't been tampered with. The zipper was intact, the contents as I had left them. But that only made the other case more impossible. My belongings couldn't be in both. The bathroom light flickered again, throwing a shadow across the tile that stretched far too long, far too thin for the silence that followed. I held still, sweat crawling cold down my spine, waiting for movement. None came. Finally, I forced my hand to the light switch by the door, snapping it down. The room fell into shadow, broken only by the glow spilling from the bathroom. The sound came again. A shuffle, a drag, like feet moving slow over tile. My throat tightened. I wanted to fling the door open, confront whatever was inside. But something deeper told me not to. Not yet. Instead, I slid the safety chain across the door, a pathetic gesture against the certainty that I wasn't alone. I stared at the card in my hand, turning it over and over. My name was etched across its face, printed in clean black letters by the hotel system only an hour ago. The clerk had smiled as she handed it to me, tapping the number she swore was mine. No mistake, no mix-up. And yet, someone else had already arrived. Someone else had brought my things before me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring up at the bathroom door. My pulse thudded in my ears, louder with every breath, until it almost drowned out the sound. Almost. The shadow shifted again across the crack at the bottom of the door. This time, it didn't vanish. It lingered, growing darker, thicker, until I realized it wasn't cast by the light at all. It was something crouched low, waiting just beyond the thin wood, too patient, too still. And though I couldn't see its face, I felt it watching me. Certain of one thing. It had checked in long before I had. I stood rooted to the carpet, every nerve screaming for me to run, but my legs refused to move. The silence in the room had thickened, stretched so taut it felt like even breathing might tear it open. My eyes locked on the bathroom door, the narrow crack of light glowing faint against the darkness around me. Then it shifted. The hinges moaned as the door eased wider, inch by slow inch. The sounds sharp and deliberate, like fingernails dragged across metal. I clutched my key card so tightly the plastic bent, my breath rasping shallow in my throat. And from the shadows beyond the door, a voice came, soft, broken, whispering my name. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was mine. The syllables curled into the air, cracked at the edges as though dragged through water, but unmistakable. I staggered backward, colliding with the bed, my heart battering against my ribs. The whisper came again, slower this time, heavier, as though it savored the sound of my name, as though it was reminding me of something I had forgotten. I wanted to scream, to drown it out, but terror sealed my throat. I could only watch as the door inched wider. The light within flickered, dimming to a sickly yellow glow, shadows spilling into the room like smoke. The suitcase by the bed sat open still, my jacket folded neatly on top, almost as if it was waiting to be worn again by whichever version of me waited inside that bathroom. The air conditioner clicked off suddenly, the hum vanishing, leaving the room in suffocating stillness. The only sound was that whisper, my own voice dripping through the air like a drop of blood falling into water. I pressed myself against the headboard, fingers digging into the wood, eyes fixed on the widening gap. My reflection shimmered faintly in the mirror above the sink, visible through the crack in the door. It moved, not with me, not at the same rhythm. Its lips parted, whispering again, my name spilling out in a low chant. The door creaked wider still, revealing only the edge of the counter, the corner of the mirror. Enough to show the reflection raising a hand, palm pressed against the glass. My hand. Only I hadn't moved. My body shook so violently I thought my knees would give. The whisper stretched into a sigh, almost tender, almost pleading. And then, in a voice too hollow to be mine, it said, "You're already here." The light in the bathroom died, plunging the crack into black. The door stood open, waiting. The whisper stopped. But the silence that followed was worse, because I could hear something else moving in there now. Slow, careful steps on the tile. Coming closer. I don't remember grabbing my suitcase. I don't remember tearing the safety chain from its latch. I only remember the slam of the door behind me and the echo of my footsteps pounding down the hall, as though the carpet itself wanted to slow me down. My breath rasped in ragged bursts, each gasp caught between panic and disbelief. The elevator seemed impossibly far away, its metal doors glowing faintly at the end of the corridor like a false promise. I stabbed the button again and again until the car arrived, the chime far too cheerful for the terror clawing at my chest. The ride down felt endless. Every flicker of the fluorescent light overhead made me think the doors would open not to the lobby, but to the same hallway I had fled. The suitcase still waiting, the bathroom door yawning wide. But the lobby greeted me at last, bright and sterile, smelling faintly of polish and artificial flowers. The clerk sat behind the desk, posture perfectly still, smile curling up as though nothing could ever be wrong inside these walls. My voice broke as I tried to explain, words tumbling over one another. The suitcase, the voice, the bathroom door that opened when it shouldn't have. Her smile didn't falter. She folded her hands neatly on the counter and listened as though I were a child spinning a nightmare. Then, when I demanded to know who else had been checked into that room, her answer struck colder than anything I had left upstairs. "You're the only guest on that floor," she said. The words hung in the air like a sentence. My knees weakened, the lobby tilting under me. I stammered, insisting I had seen belongings, had heard movement, had felt breath in the room that wasn't mine. She shook her head softly, as though I had misunderstood, as though I were mistaken about my own fear. "No one else has been there," she repeated, her eyes locking onto mine with a sharpness that contradicted her gentle tone. "Only you." I wanted to argue, to rage, but the certainty in her voice gutted me. She spoke not like someone who believed it, but like someone who had rehearsed it too many times before. My hands trembled as I set the card key on the counter, demanding another room, any room on another floor. Her gaze flicked to the card, then back to me. She slid it across the counter without touching it, as though even that small contact was dangerous. "You can move if you like," she said softly, "but it will follow you. It always does." The hum of the lobby lights deepened, low and electric, as though the walls themselves had leaned in to hear. And behind her calm smile, I thought I saw her lips form the shape of my name, just like the whisper that had chased me out of that room. I should have left the hotel that night. Every instinct screamed at me to walk out into the street, to keep driving until exhaustion buried me somewhere safer. But some stubborn thread of reason or madness convinced me to return upstairs. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I needed to see if the nightmare had reshaped itself in my absence. The elevator hummed softly, too calm, and when the doors opened onto my floor, the air was colder, thinner, as though the hallway had been waiting for me. My footsteps dragged against the carpet, each one muffled too quickly, like the walls swallowed the sound before it could escape. I reached the door with my number glowing faintly in brass, my keycard trembling in my grip. The lock blinked green. I pushed the door open. The room was immaculate, the bedspread smooth, the bathroom door closed, the air conditioner hummed in its steady monotone. For a moment, relief threatened to unspool my nerves, until I looked to the corner where I had left my suitcase. It was gone, not moved, not shifted, not tucked somewhere out of sight. Gone. The corner was bare, dust disturbed only by the faint drag marks of wheels leading toward the bathroom. My chest constricted as if unseen hands had tightened around my lungs. I staggered back, eyes flicking across the room, searching for anything familiar. But there was nothing of mine left. No clothes, no bag, no proof I had ever belonged here. Then it began again, the whisper, My name, low and broken, spilling from the bathroom door. It seeped through the cracks in the wood, coiling into the room like smoke. The sound was wetter now, gurgling at the edges, as though it came from a throat not meant for speaking. My knees weakened, pressing me back against the wall. The whisper repeated, louder, closer, until I could hear the breath behind it, ragged, heavy, pulling air that didn't exist. I clamped my hands to my ears, but it made no difference. The voice wasn't entering through sound anymore. It was in me, vibrating against my bones, unraveling my thoughts with each repetition of my name. The bathroom light flickered beneath the door. The knob turned once, slow, deliberate, but the door never opened. It didn't need to. The whisper had filled every corner, every breath, every beat of my heart. I fled then, though part of me knew it was useless. Because when I reached the hall and the elevator carried me down, the voice followed. It didn't echo anymore. It lived in the silence, between my thoughts. And long after I had abandoned the hotel, long after the night gave way to morning, I still heard it, whispering, patient, certain, as if the suitcase had not been stolen at all, only unpacked, as if I had never really checked out. Like the hotel taught us early, never cross a door marked with that little red sign. Guests valued privacy more than clean sheets or fresh towels, and it wasn't worth our jobs to forget it. So I obeyed. Every morning, I wheeled my cart down the corridor, knocking gently on each door, calling housekeeping. And if no answer came, I would slip inside and make the beds. All but one. Room 22. That sign never moved. For months, I watched it hang there, crisp and deliberate, a splash of red against the beige door. At first, I thought nothing of it. Some guests stayed for long stretches. Businessmen who vanished for days, couples who wanted quiet. But I noticed the manager never mentioned them at staff meetings. He never logged a guest name for that room, not once. Still, the sign remained. Always do not disturb, always hanging perfectly straight. Sometimes, late in the evening, when my shift was ending and the hallways fell quiet, I would hear faint sounds inside. The scrape of furniture shifting across the floor, the thump of heavy footsteps pacing slowly, deliberately, from wall to wall. Once, as I passed with my cart, I thought I heard a voice, low and muffled, whispering close to the door. The words were indistinct, but the cadence lingered in my ears long after I had left. I told myself it was none of my business. Guests had their reasons for privacy. My work was to respect that. But still, I found myself staring at that sign every morning, waiting for it to change. It never did. The other maids whispered about it sometimes. One claimed she had knocked years ago, forgetting herself, only to hear someone on the other side breathe in sharply, like she had startled them. Another swore she had seen the knob turn on its own one night when she left her cart unattended. We laughed it off in the break room, but none of us volunteered to linger near that door longer than necessary. Yet what unsettled me most was the silence of the manager. He never acknowledged room 22, never asked it to be cleaned, never scheduled maintenance. He acted as though the room didn't exist at all. And so I kept my distance. I passed it each day, eyes averted, cartwheels squealing over the carpet seam that ran directly in front of it. But no matter how quickly I walked, I always felt the weight of that closed door pressing at my back. One morning, when the hallway was empty and the hum of the vacuum masked my steps, I let my gaze linger. The sign hung as always, red letters bold and sharp. But this time, it wasn't printed. It had been scrawled in black marker across the tag, the words uneven, frantic, bleeding into the fibers. Do not disturb. And beneath it, faint but clear, someone had added another line in shaky script. She's still inside. Weeks slipped into one another, yet the door of room 22 never opened. Every morning the sign stared back at me, red against beige, daring me to question it. In all that time, I never saw a guest enter or leave. No luggage rolled past me, no footsteps echoed late at night. And still, no trash appeared outside the door, no trays of half-eaten food. Nothing to suggest anyone living, anyone breathing, existed within those walls. The hotel had a rhythm, a pulse I had come to know. Guests were messy in predictable ways, towels damp and crumpled, sheets tangled, bins overflowing with wrappers or bottles. But room 22 disrupted that rhythm. It was a void, a silence in the pattern. I tried to ignore it, to lose myself in scrubbing mirrors and smoothing bedspreads, but my eyes always drifted down the hall, always back to that sign. The other maids stopped talking about it after a while. Their silence was heavier than their gossip had been, a deliberate refusal to let the subject breathe. But in the break room, I noticed the way their eyes flicked to me whenever I returned from that hallway. As if they expected me to bring news, as if they knew I was the only one foolish enough to linger. I began to notice small things then. The air outside room 22 was colder, even when the rest of the floor stifled in summer heat. The carpet there never gathered dust, though no one ever vacuumed it. And sometimes, when I passed quickly, I thought I heard the faintest hum, like a tune caught beneath the breath, leaking through the cracks in the frame. One night, as I wheeled the cart back to storage, I made the mistake of pausing. The hallway was empty, shadows long under the weak glow of the sconces. I looked at the door, expecting stillness. But the sign had shifted. It no longer hung straight, but at a sharp angle, as if it had been tugged from the inside by impatient hands. I froze, staring, waiting for movement. None came. No footsteps, no sound. Only the crooked sign swaying slightly as though from a touch moments before. I told the manager the next morning. His face stayed carefully neutral, his pen scratching across a page. "Don't worry about 22, he said, his tone clipped, final. "It's always been occupied. Always." The word clung to me. That evening, I forced myself down the hall again, heart pounding in my throat. The sign was straight once more, perfectly aligned. But as I passed, I caught it. The faintest hiss of breath through the keyhole, sharp and deliberate, timed with my steps. Someone was inside, listening, and they had never left. I told myself I wouldn't do it, that I could endure the whispers of my co-workers, the manager's cold denial, the endless silence that clung to that door. But the longer I walked that hallway, the more the sign gnawed at me. It wasn't just the words anymore. It was the sense that something waited, that someone leaned just beyond the frame, ear pressed close, aware of me in ways I couldn't bear. So one afternoon, when the corridor was empty and the hum of the vending machine masked my breath, I stopped outside room 22. My hands shook as I reached into my pocket, fingers curling around the master key I wasn't supposed to have. It was meant for emergencies, overflow, leaks, locked out guests. I told myself this was one. My curiosity had become an emergency. The red sign hung there, too straight, too still, as if watching me. I brushed it aside, heart clawing against my ribs, and slid the key in. The lock gave with a soft, metallic sigh. For a heartbeat, I hesitated, the weight of every warning pressing down on me. But something inside me had already crossed the line. I pushed. The door creaked open. The smell hit first, stale, heavy, like damp fabric left too long in the dark. The air carried a sweetness too, cloying, rotten at the edges. I stepped inside, the carpet crunching faintly beneath my shoes, though it looked clean, freshly vacuumed. My eyes adjusted slowly, tracing the outlines of the room. It was perfect. Too perfect. The bedspread lay flat, corners tucked sharp. The lamps shone softly, bulbs warm and new. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, filled to the brim, untouched. For a moment, I thought the stories had been wrong, that it was nothing but an unused space dressed up to look alive. Then I saw the chair. It faced the door, not the desk, not the window, just the door. The cushions bore the impression of weight, deep and undeniable. And though the rest of the room gleamed, the fabric of the chair was damp, stained dark where the shape sank deepest. The air grew colder. Behind me, the door shut with a quiet click. I turned sharply, pulse screaming in my ears. My reflection in the wall mirror stared back at me, pale, frantic, chest heaving. But after a moment, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't moving. The glass of water on the nightstand trembled, a single ripple breaking its surface. And then, from the chair, came the sound I had dreaded most, the slow, deliberate drags of breath. Someone was in the room, and they had been waiting for me all along. At first, I thought the room was empty, just the chair and the stale air pressing around me. But then my eyes adjusted, sliding past the mirror, past the perfect bedspread, to the walls. They were covered. From corner to corner, top to bottom, the wallpaper was buried beneath photographs. Hundreds of them, overlapping, curling at the edges, pinned in crooked rows that seemed to breathe with the draft in the air. Every photo showed the same subject: me. In one, I was asleep on a bus, head pressed against the window, lips parted. In another, I was bent over my cart at a different hotel, tying my shoe. More still, dozens upon dozens, were of me in beds I remembered. Rooms I had worked, cities I had passed through, nights where I had woken uneasy but dismissed it as a dream. But the worst were the ones I didn't remember at all. Photos of me lying in rooms I had never stayed in, curled in sheets I didn't recognize, always sleeping, always unaware. My knees weakened. I reached out with a shaking hand, fingertips brushing one pinned above the headboard. My body lay turned to the side, hair fanned across the pillow, mouth slack in dreams. A shadow bent in the corner of the frame, long and lean, leaning over me. I tore my hand away, bile rising. The photographs seemed to pulse now, whispering with the faint rustle of paper, as if they were trying to shift, to fall, to surround me. The chair creaked. I turned sharply, my breath slicing in my throat. The indentation in the cushion was deeper now, as though someone sat invisible, watching. The air smelled thicker, cloying with that sweet rot that clung to my skin. My reflection in the mirror trembled, blurred, then steadied. Only it wasn't mine anymore. Its eyes followed me, tracking every stuttered movement, lips curling into a smile I hadn't made. I stumbled backward, colliding with the wall of photographs. They quivered violently at the touch, dozens peeling loose and fluttering down around me. They landed face up on the carpet, everyone showing me in bed, in hotels, in places I had thought safe. One photo slid across my shoe, nudged by nothing, until it came to rest at my feet. I bent to pick it up, hands shaking too violently to grip it at first. When I finally brought it close, the air left my lungs. It was tonight. The bed behind me, my body lying beneath the covers, eyes closed, hair spread against the pillow. And from the corner of the frame, the chair. occupied. The sound of breathing filled the room, close enough to warm my ear, though nothing was there. And as the photographs whispered against the walls, I realized with bone-deep certainty I hadn't just entered the room, I had entered the collection. I stood in the center of the room, the photographs breathing around me like walls of flesh, my chest too tight to draw air. My hands trembled as I bent to pick up another photo from the floor, though I already knew what I would see. It was me, always me, sleeping, unaware, helpless. My fingers burned with each print I touched, as though they weren't paper at all, but skin pulled taut, still warm from the breath of whoever had taken them. I told myself to stop looking, to turn and run, but I couldn't. The photos pulled at me, demanded I see them. And then I found it. One photograph had slipped beneath the others, half hidden under the chair. I crouched, my knees aching against the carpet, and pulled it free. The edges were damp, curling, as if it had only just been developed. The colors were too sharp, too real, the ink still bleeding faintly. The picture showed the hallway outside room 22, the carpet, the walls, the brass numbers on the door, and me. Frozen in the frame, I stood in front of the door, head bowed, sliding the master key into the lock. My face was pale, lips pressed thin with fear, every detail captured as though the photo had been taken only moments ago. I staggered backward, the photo shaking in my grip. This wasn't memory. This was now. This was tonight. Behind me, the door clicked shut, sealing me inside. The chair creaked, the indentation deepening, the air shifting as though someone had just leaned forward. The photographs on the walls rippled, paper rustling like dry leaves in wind, a chorus of whispers rising from them. My name, over and over, hushed and hungry. The glass of water on the nightstand quivered, a ripple spreading wider, wider, until it spilled silently over the edge. The lamp flickered once and died, plunging the room into a darkness lit only by the faint glow from the hallway under the door. But even that light dimmed, smothered by a shadow stretching long across the carpet, reaching toward me. I clutched the photo tighter, its surface damp, the ink smearing onto my fingers. My own face blurred, disappearing beneath my grip. But the shadow on the carpet remained. It reached me, curling over my shoes, climbing my legs, wrapping around me like the sheets in every photo on the walls. The photographs hissed louder now, a single word breaking through in a chorus of my own voice. Stay. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the picture sliding from my hand, landing face up on the floor. The image had changed. No longer the hallway, no longer the key. It showed me inside the room, wide-eyed, mouth open in a scream I hadn't yet made.